Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Kite, Chair of the HRC, and I'd like to welcome you today to the June 14th, 2023 Historic Resources Commission meeting. The HRC is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by North Carolina general statutes, the City of Asheville's Unified Development Ordinance, and Buncombe County Ordinance. We're authorized to hear requests for certificates of appropriateness for alterations, demolitions, new construction, and other work within historic districts or for the alteration and demolition of historic landmarks, and other duties, including preliminary review of subdivisions as specified in the ordinances for the HRC. I will now ask our commission members and staff to introduce themselves. We'll start down here with Shannon.
I'm Shannon Watkins. I'm a local realtor, and I was a political science major at UNC Asheville.
Amy Moxley, local architect.
Sue Oliva, American historian.
Emily Kite, local architect.
Emily Sprang. I have a master's degree in historic preservation, and I work in residential construction and design.
Will Hornaday, Albemarle Park.
Sarah Gross, anthropologist and archaeologist.
Alexander Ellenbogen, architect.
Maria De Sassi, architect.
Chris German, local architect.
Annie McDonald, architectural historian.
Janice Ashley, legal advisor to the HRC.
Alex Cole, I'm the staff liaison to the commission.
Okay. We will consider the minutes from the May meeting of the HRC. The minutes include findings of fact and conclusions of law. Are there any corrections? Is there a motion?
To accept the minutes?
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We will now begin the evidentiary hearings for the items listed on our agenda. As a quasi-judicial proceeding, the HRC is not setting policy, nor are we soliciting public opinion on the desirability of an application. The HRC hears and considers evidence presented and applies the standards set forth in the guidelines and standards of the specific historic district for that application. The HRC must make its decision upon competent, material, and substantial evidence to determine the facts of the hearing. The HRC will use judgment and discretion to apply the standards contained in the relevant guidelines to the facts. The commissioners, in voting for an item, will not have a fixed opinion that's not susceptible to change, will not have a conflict of interest, and will not have engaged in ex parte communication regarding an application. The rules for speaking are as follows. This meeting is open to the public, but participation is limited to interested parties who wish to provide comment and testimony regarding the proposal. If you will be speaking as a witness, please focus on the facts and how they relate to the relevant historic district standards and guidelines, not personal preference or opinion. Witnesses must swear or affirm their testimony. At this time, I will administer the oath for all individuals who intend to provide witness testimony today. So if you're here to speak for or against an application or are an applicant that will be presenting, if you all could just stand and come forward, please. Okay. If you will, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the information that you present during the hearing for a certificate of appropriateness or preliminary subdivision approval before the Historic Resources Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, if we can take just a quick look at our agenda, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The first thing that we need to take care of, we've got one of our applications, commissioners, is being continued to the July meeting. So I need a motion to continue the application at 246 Cumberland Avenue to the July meeting, if someone is so inclined.
I will motion to continue 246 Cumberland Avenue to the July meeting.
Yes.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, we're going to rearrange the application order today. We're going to take the 3 items under new business, Albemarle Park, and 2 applications in Montford, and move those ahead of the item for old business in Biltmore Village. So the new agenda order will be as follows. 35 Canterbury Road will be first, Montford at 8 Short Street, and then 123 West Chestnut Street, and then the 1 Angle Street and 10 Kitchen Place application will follow after the 123 West Chestnut Street project. So I think we will get started. The first item on our agenda is going to be 35 Canterbury Road, and we will first hear from Alex and your staff report.
Thank you, Chair Kite and members of the commission. I just want to say to everyone here obviously knows, but to our audience, this is our last meeting with Chair Kite and Vice Chair Spring, so I just want to say a huge thank you to them for their service. We will miss you. Okay, 35 Canterbury Road. I'm going to just go through a quick few slides with this one. I think most of you remember, we probably have a fair amount of new people, but we did review like kind of a wholesale rehabilitation application for this project about a year or so ago. And so at the time, if any of you made a site visit, you probably observed the really cool greenhouse that was attached to the structure at some point in its history. And at that time, the owners were hoping to restore that at some point. However, I understand that it is not really, it's going to be exorbitantly expensive to repair. I think if you looked at it up close, if you saw it up close, you could easily tell that it would be a pretty monumental task to restore it. So this is a non-contributing structure, and this is a later addition to a non-contributing structure. So just some context photos. This is the site plan. So the application is to remove the greenhouse and to construct an addition on the side elevation in the same location. It will be smaller in footprint, as you can tell from the site plans. The existing sunroom or greenhouse rather is encroaching into the setback. So the existing addition will be clearly within the setback. So no problems there. And this is the proposed, I didn't pull up or add the elevation drawings to my slides. I thought it would be more useful for this conversation to just show the perspective rendering. So I think it's a pretty straightforward, simple request for the addition. I think it is consistent with the architectural style of this house. Is fairly small and does not overwhelm the structure. So I've not noted any concerns in my staff report, but I'm happy to answer questions if the commission has any.
Looks like that addition's planned to be siding, lap siding.
Correct. There is siding existing on the house and the gable end on the other side, and then there's lap siding as well on the sides of the dormers, and it will be wood lap siding.
And you said, Alex, that this whole property, this whole house is non-contributing.
Correct. Correct.
And Alex, could you just clarify that the other changes that we see between the renderings and plans and the current conditions photos were approved, like the change from the 2 half-round dormers to the 1 shed dormer, and then the elimination of that second-story porch? Those were part of the earlier application?
Correct. So
Okay.
the terrace that's on the front of the house, as well as the dormer change, were part of that application, as were some fenestration changes on the front elevation, including the set of door. I'm trying to, if I remember correctly, it's the set of doors on the far left, and then the main entry door. It had this kind of nondescript door within that entry, so there's will be glass in there, and so everything that you see in this image is all previously approved.
With the exception of that?
Of the addition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Commissioners, other questions for Alex? Okay, we could hear from the applicant.
got the application packet pulled up, so if you need anything out of that, perfect. I'm happy to help you drive. If you want to show things on the projector, we can do that too. Just
I just printed out backup in case we needed it.
And if you'll just state your name before you start. that would be
Yes, my name
helpful.
is Margaret Chandler. I am with Altura Architects. Alex pretty much covered everything. The application that we're submitting is for certificate of appropriateness to replace the existing greenhouse, which is in pretty tragic disrepair right now. The owners did solicit quotes to have it repaired from like 5 or 6 restorers from around the country, and it was prohibitively expensive. So the most practical way to make the site fully occupiable, because it is a danger in its current state. So the most, practical way to make the site fully occupiable is to tear it down, and then in order to retain the same usage that they were hopeful to get out of this restored greenhouse, we're proposing replacing it with the sunroom shown in the elevation. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through and get, there we go. Yeah. Proposing the sunroom shown in these 3D renderings, which gets your sort of 3 sides glazed feel. It repeats a lot of the elements of the existing house, the sort of fenestration scale and mull pattern, the siding materials, as you pointed out, the roof pitch and material, and then the timber bracketing feel used elsewhere on the main house.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
What happens to the upper level porch on the right-hand side?
So that was from the previous certificate of appropriateness, but that porch is a major source of water intrusion now. So we have gotten the certificate of appropriateness and proceeded with the design to basically enclose that second floor porch. So the sunroom is sort of, it's not a perfect replacement of outdoor space because it's not outdoor space, but it gives them the same or a similar, indoor-outdoor kind of enjoyment spot.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay. I'm going to pause for a moment and open the floor for any public comment. Seeing none, we'll close the floor for public comment. Commissioners, other discussion or questions or comments? Silence mean we're ready to make a motion?
It's pretty straightforward.
Madam Chair, I'll entertain or make that motion.
Excellent.
I'm learning. Madam Chair, based on the evidence presented to this commission, including Exhibit A, application and project description, 5 pages, Exhibit B, photos, 4 pages, Exhibit C, plans, 7 pages, Exhibit D, renderings, 5 pages, Exhibit E, material specifications, 11 pages, Exhibit F, photos of other buildings in the district, 8 pages, Exhibit G, owner's affidavit, Exhibit G, and the commission's actual inspection and review of the subject property by all members, except anybody, by all members. I move that this commission approve the certificate of appropriateness based on the following. That the application is to remove substantially deteriorated greenhouse addition from the west elevation, construct a new 19.5 foot by 19 foot addition on the west elevation with woodlap siding matching existing, multi-light metal casement windows and pedestrian door, and gable end asphalt shingle roof in weatherwood color. Install 3 skylights on rear-facing portion of the roof on the addition. All work will be in accordance with attached and approved drawings and plans. All permits, variances, or approvals as required by law must be obtained before work may commence. that the design standards for non-contributing structures found on page 36 of the Albemarle Park Historic District Architectural Standards adopted July 8, 2015, were used to evaluate this request. This application does meet the design standards for the following reasons. The existing greenhouse is in a state of substantial disrepair and is not original to the existing house. The new addition is compatible with the size, scale, color, material, and character of the neighborhood, the building, and its environment. That the action and improvements proposed in the application before us for a certificate of appropriateness are congruous with the special historic character of the Albemarle Park Historic District.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Based upon the foregoing findings and for the reasons stated forth therein, I move that a certificate of appropriateness be issued with the following conditions: that the skylight specifications will be submitted for staff review and approval.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Okay. Next up on the agenda, 8 Short Street in the Montford Historic District. We'll start, Alex, with your report.
All right, thank you again. This application is, again, for 8 Short Street. This property contains a 2-story craftsman-style house that was constructed about 2018. It was pretty recently approved. This property, I should have added a site plan, my apologies, but this property is located just off of Cherry Street on Short Street, and if you're familiar with this area, this was a vacant lot for some time. It was a way that people traveled through the site between Montford Avenue and Short Street, ABCCM, that facility. So it has a lot of transient traffic through it, historically speaking, and I'll let the applicant describe in more detail their experiences, but, typically we are, discouraging fences in front yards where they did not exist historically. However, I can say in my time with the commission, Short Street is a location where the commission has in the past supported fences because they're very small yards. There were a number of fences there that have been there for don't know how long, but there's quite a number of properties along there that have fences. So the request is really because they are experiencing, if you looked at any of the photos, I didn't include them in the slides, but if you looked at the photos or the still shots from their security cameras in this property, there are people that are coming onto their porch that do not belong there. And so while I think the commission obviously has gotten requests for fences in front yards for safety reasons in the past, and I think we've all agreed that you really have to base it on the standards and whether or not it's appropriate to a given location. But I sort of felt like it was kind of an extreme example of a safety issue if you look at the images they submitted. So I'll let Kendra, the applicant, speak in more detail on that. I'm not necessarily noting a concern so much with the overall fence style, or it's more in my issue with this one will be just like the siting of the fence as shown on the site plan. When I visited the site, it appears that if you come all the way across the front yard to the north building or north property line, you're going to basically intersect a tree, a newly planted tree that's there. So one suggestion on my end would be to terminate it farther into the lot so that, or make it turn farther into the lot so that the tree is outside of it and not going to be in the way of the fence. I do, it's a little bit odd because the yard steps down, so it's going to the fence is going to have to step down too, so it's not going to be necessarily straight across, but also bringing that corner in will also help shorten the section that will need to step down a little bit, I think. I considered that it might look more appropriate for it to be at the front property boundary, but if you have a gate there at the stair, there's not going to be a way to open it because there's going to be a car in the street and you can't open it towards the stair. So it's a little bit funky in terms of its placement in the front yard, I think, but I'm not sure there's necessarily a way around that if you all feel like you can support a fence at all. So I feel like they kind of are doing the best they can with the site conditions that are present. So, yeah, I mean, I just noted in my staff report that generally fences in front yards where they didn't exist historically are discouraged because that's what we always talk about with fences. But I'll just reiterate that when we've talked about it in the past, it's been more so, it's obviously very subjective, but where we have these like big prominent properties like Montford Avenue and Cumberland Avenue, that's generally where the commission has had the highest concern about fences in front yards. And I would say Short Street and Magnolia Street have been the ones where the commission's been mostly supportive of fences in the past, in my time in this position. So I'll just leave it at that. And if you all have questions for me, happy to answer.
Were those picket fences on?
Sorry, can you,
Were those,
I meant to say at the beginning that it was noted to me that it's a little bit hard to hear in here, so just to reiterate, you don't have to shout, but speak up into the microphone.
Were those picket fences that were approved? I saw one metal fence on the street, but for the majority, it was picket or leftover chain link.
Yeah, there's at least one picket, like metal picket fence that's been approved in my time, and at least one wood picket fence. I'd have to go back and double check. I can't remember every single fence I've looked at on this street, but I'm pretty sure there have been at least two. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions for Alex? Okay, we can hear from the applicant.
Kendra, I've got all your photos and your ring camera images and everything pulled up here, so I'll just let you drive, but if you need my help or anything, let me know.
Okay. Hey, everybody, I'm Kendra Plating. This is my husband, Chris. We're the homeowners. Yeah, it's really just the location of this house that I think makes it need a fence for security reasons. Like Alex was saying, there's just a lot of folks that use our yard as a cut through. So the back of our house actually backs up to the Hunter Banks Fly Shop parking lot. So that's kind of comes off of Montford Ave. So a lot of folks come over the Montford Bridge and either cut through that parking lot and cut through our yard to go over to the ABCCM. So just, I'm not going to go into too many details unless y'all want, but the day that we closed on the house, we actually found someone sleeping in the house. And he had needles and stuff throughout the house. And we have 2 kids and a dog, so it is a safety concern for us. And then we have had just this week someone come up to our back door and knock on the door, and my husband politely asked him to leave, and he gave him the bird and said some choice words to my husband. So this is, we expect some of this just where we are, the location where we are, in Montford and Asheville. But also, the police, when they came to remove the person who had been sleeping in our house, said probably just some kind of little deterrent to demarcate that this is a yard would be helpful, because it kind of just blends in between the parking lot and Short Street. Do y'all have any questions?
I want to just add one thing I didn't say before, is that you all might be in the know on this, but there has been an uptick of crime generally in Montford. So I just want to point that out because I think it's germane to the discussion, because I think we could probably anticipate that we're going to see more offense applications than we have even in the past. So
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, we did have someone, who was using drugs on our back porch, and it just happens.
Questions for the applicant?
Did you look at other options for fences that are more historic?
We got 4 quotes from Asheville Fence Company. Sorry, can you hear? So we have 4 different quotes from a variety of materials, from wood to aluminum. We walked the neighborhood and saw what else was being used. We're more than open to suggestions on placement and style. We come from the last place we were at was a mid-century home that we lovingly restored for a decade, so we're happy to try and accommodate anything from the design board in terms of placement or material usage. This is not the steel fence was not the cheapest option. It was what we thought would be enough of a physical barrier, have the kind of resilience to demarcate that while also including the visibility. From the street, you look up at this house, which is already an oddly tall house within, and so building something that seemed more imposing was what we were trying to avoid with the choice of the steel, and then again, the steel or the aluminum for just the quality of finish and the longevity of it.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay, we'll pause for just a moment and open the floor for public comment. Seeing none, I will close the floor for public comment. Commissioners, further discussion? I can think of one application that we had, and it was one of those more prominent properties right along Montford or Cumberland, or one of those that was sort of a corner lot near a bus stop. That was a challenging one with very similar concerns from a safety standpoint. And we did approve that fence. And I'm struggling, Alex, to remember what the material was there. One of the bigger conversations that I think we had was the placement of the fence in relation to the property line. And I think in that particular case, we stepped the fence back from the property line so that we could sort of landscape it and soften the visual impact of that along the front. And I wonder if, given the sort of sighting of the front of the house and the kind of steep bank, if there's an opportunity, because we already sort of have to set the fence back a ways, if some landscaping in the front is appropriate to help sort of soften the visual impact of that in a similar manner to that other property was much flatter, but it was a pretty prominent corner lot, and I don't remember what street it was on.
It was the corner of Watauga and Montford, and it was the same material as this fence.
That's what I was remembering, that it was a very similar fence.
Yeah.
I don't remember its height. This is, I think you said 4 feet?
Yeah, 4 feet, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, that one was 4 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would like to landscape in front. It's grass now, but it's hard to mow because it's a steep slope.
Yeah.
So landscaping in front of the fence would be absolutely what we would plan to do.
I think our question would just be immediacy of, is the landscaping have to happen at the same exact time as the fence, or can that be a staged?
I think there's some language in there about the timeline for landscaping.
There is, but it's only for new construction projects.
Oh, well.
That makes sense. Not really helpful for this. I mean, what, in your mind, like, how much time do you think would be realistic? You don't have to finish a CA or certificate of appropriateness is good for 1 year, but you don't have to finish all the work within that 1 year. You just have to start it. So, like, theoretically, you could put the fence in, tomorrow, and then do the landscaping in 6 months or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. When it gets cooler in the fall
Yeah.
would be when we'd start planting, yeah.
I guess 6 months would be winter, so you probably.
Yeah, 3 months would be fall-ish. Yeah, sorry. That was my fault.
Well,
Sorry.
I agree that, the screening of fences has been a topic that we've heard a lot. It's, consistent with our previous decisions. I think also the fact that you mentioned it is a kind of taller house on,
On a hill.
I feel like that's to their advantage because, the fence isn't going to be like blocking the house.
I feel it's also going to be, with the 4-foot rise or 3.5, it's going to be a 7-8 foot kind of, not traditionally historic looking fence that's on a pedestal. And I know that the landscaping is going to help a lot, but none of the other houses that we've approved have had landscaping that's come in to smother that fence very well, including that one on Monford or some other ones. It seems like that fence just stays there and it's black and that's where would a loop wire.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The concern with the loop wire was the amount of bracketing it would need because of that slope. And so the fence company said the amount of bracketing, you would lose any illusion. If you're trying to see through, this is the best option.
Or a shorter picket fence?
Potentially, if it would be a
Is that
deterrent.
enough of a deterrent picket?
Right, and the reason we were high on the shelf was because of an easement to the road, and I think you can see a water meter is that circle that's in the front of the yard. So if we could go closer to the road, then we could potentially figure out a solution for the door opening at that front stair, but I don't believe it's legal and we would be obscuring our neighbor's meter, which we have our neighbor's approval. That's a law office to the left in this photo. So he's on board with how the fence would go up to his property, but we could, if there's leniency on how far forward we could go, then we're happy, again, to accommodate that. To the concern about how far over it goes, the idea was that it would include both of the trees that are on that property would be on the inside of the fence. So I was thinking you could potentially follow the fence line up to the stairs and then cut down and be further from the yard. But we then lose usable space for our children to use our yard, and it's already only a 1/10 of an acre. So, you know.
It just looked like to me that you'd have to, if you're drawing a straight line from the end of the walkway, you'd have to go right, like, you're gonna be pretty close to the tree. Like you're gonna cut off the little mulch circle around it.
I think the way he had it figured, the mulch would be enclosed, but it would be right on the mulch line, basically, right around the mulch line.
I think I would love to your point, Will, see the fence come closer to the road to the extent that it can. And just because I think it still provides the necessary physical barrier, but the scale gets better, sort of down the slope a little bit. I think it makes a little bit of a weird thing on the house side of it where you've got this kind of little, sort of weirdly shaped.
The problem was the gate,
Right.
needing the gate to open, and so.
Well, and it's not
with the
really, you don't
stairs-
have there's not a
There's
good
not a
way to
landing
put
in
a
between.
landing there, and the gate would have to swing out towards where you're standing on this little precarious
Yeah.
Is it- and
step.
it's a-
Like, it's just not.
And I will say too, about those steps, that was something that the commission required them to keep. There was a set of steps there. I think that.
That's right.
That they had to repair them as
That's
part
right.
of the construction project.
So
In that location at least.
could the gate be up at the top of the stairs, but then the fence sort of jog back down so that you have this sort of gate at the top, but you bring the that's a little weird too. Sometimes I think out loud until a good
No,
idea comes
it's-
out, and
We've been thinking about it
not
for a
always
long
on the
time,
first
yeah.
try.
Yeah.
So-
Similarly
Please.
to the safety issues of this site, we're also talking about just the site conditions generally. It's a weird
It-
site.
yeah.
It is.
And I honestly think that putting it up, like off the street is less visible to me because the foundation height of this house is so tall in the front, like if you're
Yeah.
looking at the exhibit B, the first photo, the dark colored lattice and stairway are so dominant on the front elevation and tall that I think it'll kind of
Just
fade
blend into that,
a little bit.
yeah. Well, I think there's also clearly the stair is existing. We've not, there's language in the Montford standards around altering the existing terrain, which clearly has not been done in this case, if we've got that sort of existing stair that's gone up there anyways. And so we're really working with the terrain that we've been given on this site without any significant alterations to that, which I think is important.
Yeah, I think as with any of the other fence approvals that the commission has been okay with, I think you just make it site specific, Like it may not work to do a fence right in front of a front elevation and walkway for another property, but I don't know, I don't take issue with it, with this particular.
Yeah, I think if this house were not as tall, it probably would be different.
Is 4 feet enough of a deterrent in the back?
It's a good question. Our hope is simply having a place
Visual.
to post and just something that demarcates. Our cars will be accessible,
Yeah.
outside the fence, but we're trying to make the minimal impact while simply stating to the effort of opening a door, we're hoping it is enough. And I think that from the traffic we've seen, there's not been anything that's been malicious, but again, it's not just a pass-through, it is sometimes a destination. So, and we just don't really want it to, we don't want to have to scan the grounds of our property before our kids go outside.
Well, based on the citing and your testimony and the rest of the board, I've shifted back to staff's recommendation, or staff's doesn't have a problem with it. But I'm just one.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? We could entertain a motion if everyone feels good about that. Wherever they are. There we go.
Madam Chair, I'm not going to make the motion, but I would like to recommend that we include a finding that deals, that addresses the unusual site conditions of the property, that kind of sets this apart from perhaps other COA applications.
Yeah, is that a wording that we would maybe put in the conditions?
I think that is number 3.
Or incorporate it?
Sorry. Trying to listen to Janice and to you.
Oh.
A way to put some verbiage into the motion saying this is a very particular site, special, circumstance.
Would that fall?
In the reasons for
Number
how
3.
it's consistent with the
Right,
with the
application.
standards, but
Yeah.
you could say something like we don't normally have it in this location, but because of the topography, it seems like the best location.
Okay.
You don't want to emphasize the safety issue as much because even though that's a consideration, there's also might be something you need to add about some precedents on this particular street.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she'll add that in 3A.
The other thing I think we end up with is let me just check really quick. I think we add a condition on there to submit a landscaping plan to be approved at staff level.
Okay.
And that's just so you don't have to apply for another CA.
That's great. Well, and I think from my standpoint, it makes me way more comfortable with approving the fence if I know that that's also attached to it.
Agreed. All right, so does it look like we're ready for me to do the motion?
I think so. She's working on that language on that.
Okay. Madam Chair, based upon the evidence presented to this commission, including Exhibit A, application and project description, 3 pages, Exhibit B, photos, 2 pages, Exhibit C, site plan, Exhibit D, fence example image, Exhibit E, ring camera images, 7 pages, and the commission's actual inspection and review of subject property by all members, I move that this commission approve the certificate of appropriateness based on the following. 1, that the application is to install a 4-foot-tall metal picket fence in front, side, and rear yards. All work will be in accordance with attached and approved drawings and plans. All permits, variances, and approvals as required by law must be obtained before work may commence. 2, that the design standards for fences and walls found on pages 36 to 37 of the Montford Historic District Design Standards adopted on April 14th, 2010, and amended December 9th, 2019, were used to evaluate this request. 3, this application does meet the design standards for the following reasons. A, new fencing will be sited in locations that are compatible with the traditional historic relationship of fences to historic properties in the district, given the specific site conditions of the parcel. B, new fencing will be metal picket and will not exceed 4 feet in height and will not be more than 65% solid. C, design of new fence is in keeping with the historic character of the neighborhood and architectural style of the house. 4, that the action and improvements proposed in the application before us for a certificate of appropriateness are congruous with the special historic character of the Montford district.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Based upon the foregoing findings and for the reasons set forth therein, I move that a certificate of appropriateness be issued with the following conditions.
Can I ask a really quick question on the condition? Are you all wanting screening on just the front part of the fence? Or just
That's,
the front?
I mean, from my,
Front yard?
that's what I feel like is what I was
It's gonna
expecting.
be the back.
Just want to make sure.
With the following conditions. That landscaping plan for screening the fence will be submitted for staff review and approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving to the next item on our agenda is still in the Montford District, 123 West Chestnut Street.
All right, fences are one theme of the day. We haven't had any fences in a while.
True.
I think this one's going to be a little trickier. My Google Street View is not the best picture, but hopefully we're able to go by. There's also a photo in your packet. There's an existing chain link fence that goes around two sides of this property. It's on the corner of Chestnut Street and Cumberland Alley. So fences on corner lots are required to basically have the same qualities as fences in front yards on the side as well as in the front. So there is a chain link fence. For newer commissioners, when we've had this come up a couple of times where there was an existing chain link fence, and because there was an existing fence, the commission has supported replacement of the fence with a more historically appropriate style of fencing. The tricky thing with this one is that, so on the site plan on the top right, the green line is an existing section of chain link fence adjacent to one side of the front walkway, and then the red section is actually, a large portion of that is missing. And so it's kind of overgrown, so you can't really tell in the photo. So the application is to just replace the missing section of fence, and then they're proposing to construct a new parking pad in the rear yard. They don't have any off-street parking, and the backyard. It's really big, so they're planning to do a parking pad back on the northwest corner of the lot along the alley. And then they'll need to take out a section of chain link fence there to put that in, and then they want to put a new fence around the inner part of the parking pad within the parcel. The applicant and I talked about fence style a good bit. There were some options that he posed. One was replace the section in the front yard with new chain link, since he's not replacing all of it. Would that look less weird than having just a section of metal picket fencing there? I don't know what the right answer to. We've never run into this in my time before, where I think it would be easier if we were talking about the entire section of fence, right? The entire fence, but we're just talking about the one section. So that is on the table for discussion of if the commission is just okay with the small section of chain link fence going back in the front yard around that corner until at such a time they want to replace the entire fence. Or is the commission okay with these little places where there's a different style of fence? I don't know personally where I land with this. Generally, I'm supportive, obviously, of them replacing the chain link, but I tend to think that it might look less odd if there's like post and wire at least versus the metal picket fencing is a pretty stark contrast to chain link. But I still think it's going to look pretty weird in the front yard of this parcel. So I'm a little stuck on this one myself. And I just noted that. And if we're gonna get in the weeds on the metal fencing, my opinion would be to make it as simple of a design as possible, like what we were looking at in the previous application versus something more decorative like either of these options that are shown here. I will say that the inspiration for the one on the right is from a historic fence, like one of the only ones that we know is historic, was Bill Eakins' fence on Starnes Avenue. It's a beautiful fence, if a fence can be cool. It's real thin wrought iron and just really light. It doesn't really create a true barrier to the eye. But obviously modern construction of fencing doesn't look like that. So, yeah, I'm really just sharing information more than making a recommendation on this one because I think we just have to get through the discussion and figure out where we land.
Do you know if they're open to replacing the other half on the front?
I imagine at some point, but I think they're working on a pretty, I think, sounds like large renovation project of the house itself. And so I don't know like when they might want to get to that. I do want to note that I know we've talked about screening just now. Obviously, that would be weird. Couldn't really set a replacement section in the front yard back. A, B, even if you did, the other section, the green part terminates into the historic wall on the neighboring property. So it would really make more sense for it to be right at the property boundary to meet the wall in a logical place as it does now, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't recommend setting fencing back on this particular property. It's a little bit of a quandary. Any other questions for me?
So they're proposing new fence on the front left, and then the rear around the parking, right?
Right.
Just those two locations.
Right, correct.
Is there existing chain link on both sides of the lot?
Yes.
Is that what that one is?
Yep, it goes all the way across the front of the lot and all the way down the alley.
Alex, there is a new metal fence kind of diagonally across West Chestnut Street. Do you know when that was approved?
I don't, it was definitely before my time with the commission.
Okay.
We could run upstairs and try to pull a file for it, if
That's
it's helpful.
That fence that's diagonally across the street is close to the front edge of the grass. It's close to the sidewalk. And it turns the corner and extends down the driveway a bit, and it terminates in a solid wood fence. Do you know if that solid wood fence was approved at the same time as the wood fence?
Probably helpful to show everybody what you're looking at. Are you looking at street view?
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks like that's at 130 West Chestnut.
So fences in rear yards, we review those in rear and side yards, we review those as minor work all the time because privacy fencing is pretty common request. And it can be 6 feet tall and fully opaque versus front yard fences that are required to have some, I think it's like 60, they can't be more than 65% solid. And the material is different, right? We don't allow just solid wood fencing across the front yard. So, I mean, it does come up when we're talking about, at least for me, when I've given feedback in the past on fencing, to try to be consistent with style throughout the site, but at the same time, obviously, if you want like a true privacy fence in the backyard, that is allowed, and that's typically what people want versus a metal picket fence. So, does that answer your question? I would assume that we approved both of these and possibly the fence in the front yard when this house was built, because I think it's a newer house. But again, I'm happy to run upstairs and see if I can.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So just to clarify for me, because I didn't understand this on the application, that lower quarter, it's going to be a new material, and then it's going to marry into the chain link for a while, and then it's going to be in the car corral a box around the cars.
Yeah, it'll basically just be that red section will be a new section of fence of whatever material. And then the red box in the back, the section of chain link along the alley will be removed. And then they'll carve out the little box for the parking pad, and then they'll construct fencing within the parking pad. So like when you get out of your car, you go through the gate into the yard, if that makes sense.
It seems like a good house where fences aren't intrinsic to Montford, that it's causing, especially being part there and part not, and then piecing in a new element that doesn't meet the standards.
But the commission
As
has,
chain link.
but the commission has allowed replacement of chain link in other locations in Montford. There was one on Cumberland Avenue that was within the past year. I don't know if you recall, it's a lot that doesn't have a building on it anymore, next to the big, there's one of the big apartment buildings that's between Chestnut Street and I think Magnolia. That was allowed to be replaced with a new section of metal fence recently, and there was also a project on Pearson that is a giant lot, it's almost an acre, on Pearson, where the commission allowed them to install a new fence where there was a chain link fence, so.
So you're suggesting that a chain link fence that matches the rest of the side goes there?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm not saying that I think that's.
What if you did suggest something?
No.
What would it be?
I mean, honestly, I think that might be if, and I'll let the applicant speak to this. If this is not going to be their long-term, I mean, I know we can't really require that or bank on that exactly, but I think it's going to look really weird to have just this one little section and then you've got chain link on the other side of the walkway, personally. I don't know, though, that the standards for chain link, again, you'd have to make very specific reasons for this. If you approve the chain link in this location, I think you would just say it's replacing an existing section, small section or whatever. Because the way the standards for chain link are written is it's like only allowed in rear yards. And then even then it has to be set back off the property line by 5 feet, I think it says. And
Dark in color.
dark in color, so they're very specific, but I think that's not necessarily what you wouldn't, I don't think, stipulate that, obviously, in this particular situation. Now, the back corner is maybe a different question. I could maybe see getting my head around, like post and wire or something there. But I don't think that the metal picket fence is necessarily the best solution for either location, personally. Did anybody else have thoughts about the front corner in particular? Or do you want to hear from the applicant and then we can just keep talking through?
I
Okay.
think some questions for applicant.
Okay.
He's ready to go. You would just state your name before you start.
Get out here, wait, I'm just gonna pull up your folder. This has all your stuff in it, but I'll just leave it on the presentation and just let me know if you need my help.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Jaime Mueller. Alex did a great job. There was one small bit of miscommunication, I think, probably in the way maybe I wrote up the description of the project, is the entire, one option, the simplest option and cheapest option is just for us to replace the missing section, which is denoted in red along the front, with chain link, and then it's all chain link. What we would like to do is remove all the chain link from the front, including the green and the red, and replace it with one of those proposed metal fences to make it look a little nicer. I think either of those styles will look a little nicer than the chain link, especially the old rusted chain link that's on the green section. But yeah, so our idea is not to have a mix of along the front, new and old rusty chain link. Is just to tear out all the chain link along the front and replace that. Of course, we'd like to do the entire alley as well, but that's 150 feet. It's just cost prohibitive for us right now, But for now, this would allow us to basically seal off our yard, let our dog or dogs, right now dog, play in the yard, and just have that kind of secure area there for him to enjoy and for us to make use of as well. The parking pad along the back that we're proposing, again, a fence around that so that we're not now opening up the backyard, in which case we wouldn't bother putting up a fence in the front yard. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, remove the entire chain link from the front, replace it with either of those two styles. Our preference frankly is the one on the right, the one with the little hoops. That looks a little nicer to us. I'm still waiting to get quotes from various fencing companies, about that. We got shoehorned into this meeting, so we weren't planning to be here until next month, but I took the opportunity to jump in and hopefully get the ball rolling. But yeah, so we're still waiting on quotes. We have affordable quotes for the one on the left, and of course, chain link would be cheaper than that. But again, our preference is just to get rid of the chain link entirely from the front, from the West Chestnut side of the house. I know it was probably my fault in the way I drew it. I should have maybe used different wording or had a better drawing or something.
I think that's better.
Yeah. Yes, I know that didn't help. I was trying to denote too many things by the colors.
We're making progress.
Makes it a little
Yes.
easier on us.
Yeah.
We're making progress.
Yeah, so remove it all.
I mean, I think if we're gonna entertain a change in materials, that transition basically between the red and what's left of the alley's frontage feels like an easier, more graceful transition than at the gate in the front, for sure.
Right, and I noted it that way because I thought maybe y'all wouldn't want, if I don't wrap around the metal picket fence around the corner, then I would replace it with chain link, which I'm happy to do as well, and then that whole line would be the same. But for some reason, I thought that if I was going to put up any new fence, it would sort of all have to be the same. But if I can do chain link on that corner and save whatever it is, although for that small section, it wouldn't be much.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of like it turning the corner. Just the sort of view direction as you drive down Chestnut
Right.
Street, you sort of see a bit of that corner before you lose sight of it as you drive by or walk by.
Hoop and spear?
Hmm?
The hoop and spear kind?
Oh, yeah, I don't know about that.
It's very similar to.
Yeah, I see the photograph. That's Bill's house. It's in the email in the exhibits. It just is really delicate in that photograph
Very
in a
thin.
different way. Yeah.
There was another one that was approved like that on Oxford Avenue years ago, like probably 7 or 8 years ago.
It is different.
And it was, a new fence. And then I will say that just to add to the one design of the metal fence on the left, when the application for the property on Cumberland Avenue came through, that's probably been more than a year, but I had the circles within the top part of it, and the commission wasn't supportive of it because it created more of a horizontal,
Yeah.
fine horizontal line.
Yeah. I
Loses
think-
some of its the lightness that we sort of want to have in the front.
In the past, we've opted for simplicity and, and making sure that those pickets stay narrow.
Sure. Understand. The hoops to be clear, on the left, the style on the left, the hoops are an addition, right? So that same style is available with and without the hoops and various other decorative elements. But yeah, we could certainly leave the hoops out, or the circles out rather.
I mean, where's my? Oh, there we go.
Sorry, we're having some technical trouble out here.
You cannot answer things. If those are my only two options, the option on the right for me is visually less sort of,
It's not
it's
as heavy.
lighter. But I think there's even lighter still that could be an option that's not on the paper.
And simpler.
It's just a real simple,
Post and wire? Or what do you mean?
well, even
different-
this material, but closer to the last application, which was just a real, straightforward vertical picket with a bottom rail and a top rail.
I'll add, if I may, my preference for the one on the right is it sort of gave some protection of the sort of the spear points.
Mm-hmm.
And since we were on Chestnut, I don't know if I wanted to be concerned about anyone leaning on it or falling against it. I don't know how likely that is, but I was just sort of kind of hedging my bets, thinking sort of.
Impalement protection is noted.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
And it was this a 4 foot tall?
Yeah.
Yes, it would be
Sections.
all 4 foot.
Mhm.
You also have to consider, and that's not a great photo, but you have to consider whether or not the style is consistent with the architectural style of the house too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the architectural style of the house being such, clean lines and, rectangles, I would probably prefer something straighter to the hooped, just simple vertical picket.
Do you have any plans for there's a decent amount of landscaping already in place?
Along the front,
Along
yes,
the front.
we've been working on the garden. My wife does most of that. So.
But the plan would be to keep it?
Keep it, yes. We have one dead butterfly bush that didn't make it through the winter, so that'll be removed. I mean, it's apropos of nothing, but,
Yeah.
but other than that, the landscaping should remain undisturbed.
Well, from my perspective, I think there's a decent amount of precedent in other applications where we've allowed replacement of fencing that's already in place. And in this particular case, the relationship of the existing fence to the adjacent wall seems like we want the fence to go back where it was. I like that there's already landscaping in place, and so for me, I think I would just like to see the most delicate, kind of simple fence detail that we can have there.
I'm so sorry. Am I allowed to?
You need to come up to the microphone and were you sworn in?
No, she got here late. She's my wife. She got here late.
I'm just not familiar with
She's just-
the whole process. I just had a question.
Were you sworn in?
No, she was not.
Yeah, you do.
Can you just ask to clarify, the delicacy of the fence, like, does the one across the street on the new build, is that delicate?
Oh.
Is that what they're,
I see, okay.
sorry.
So I don't know if that made it through, but I will repeat. So as far as delicacy of the fence or delicateness of the fence compared to the catty corner fence that was brought up just a while ago on the new build, just in comparison, is that delicate?
Can we get back to the street view?
I didn't feel that one matched a newer build, and then your Richard Sharp Smith-ish house
Right.
is, I think it just kind of comes off a little, well, maybe, and it's landscaping, or
Lack of landscaping.
lack of landscaping that makes it look set upon the landscape instead of integrated. So,
I would add too, just, I don't know when this was approved, but we've had a couple come through where there's a
That
top
little
bar.
circle thing at the, is that what I'm seeing there, is the circle thing or no?
There's a,
Oh, I see
there's
what's
a
up.
double
Double bar.
railing on the
Yeah.
top, and the commission has said no to the top
Mhm.
railing in the past,
Ah.
so there's, again, kind of going back to the circle thing, just having less
Right.
of a
The
horizontal
pickets,
boundary.
yep.
Kind of lightens the fence, but.
I mean, those pickets seem pretty skinny to me, which I like.
Yeah. There's a lot of visibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that a fence that's got, you take the top rail off of this fence, and it's just the pickets,
One top, one bottom.
but not even the super top, just so that the pickets stick up.
Right, and that's like the same as the fence we were
Mhm.
just looking at.
Yeah.
in the previous application.
Right.
I do want to ask though, like, is everybody feel like the metal fencing is appropriate to the style of the house? I mean, the commission has not been necessarily prone to approving wood picket fences.
Yeah.
Have been more interpreted as like an architectural detail. Have been more so discouraged, but there's also post and wire was the most commonly found historic fence material in the district. But I'm just asking the question of the commission just to consider whether or not metal is the right style for the house.
Well, the post and wire fence, I'm assuming is not useful for containing dogs, right?
I mean, I wouldn't make that argument 100%, but I would feel more comfortable if my 100-pound dog was held behind an aluminum or steel picket fence versus a post and wire. I mean, I've seen them, and you know, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I can't argue. I haven't done the test, right? I haven't had my dog charge it, but I have. You know, you can grab your hand and move it, and I don't know. I guess my other thought was, being along Chestnut, there is quite a lot of physical pedestrian traffic there. Certainly no transient traffic in terms of people encroaching on our our lot and accessing our porch. But my thought was also some concern about the durability. If someone leans against it, stumbles against it, just wants to yank on it back and forth, how durable is a post and wire versus an aluminum fence. And additionally, I think the aluminum one looks better in my mind. Especially as it transitions over around the corner to the chain link.
Madam Chair, in looking at the design standards for Montford, it states that acceptable materials for all fences include metal pickets, wood pickets, wrought or cast iron or loop wire. All materials must be finished. The purpose of wire fencing is to provide a boundary where appropriate that is less visible within the landscape and does not appear as an architectural feature. And with acknowledging that I'm still fairly new on the commission, so I'm not fully aware of the entire body of precedent, in the commission's decision-making on metal fences. But it seems to me that both fences proposed meet that standard for transparency and appropriate materials, and that there is not a clear standard or expectation for dimension of pickets. I understand the preference for the fewer horizontal members, and given what we have in the design standards and given what is before us, I would be in support of the rounded fence, because it does to me appear less, pardon the use of a very subjective term, busy. It does appear more simple, and lacking a standard for picket dimension on a metal fence such as this, I am hesitant to hold the applicant to something that is not clearly written, to which they may not have had access ahead of time.
I think some of what the commission has discussed in previous applications comes from a perspective of fencing in front yards being sort of out of character with what's in Montford in the first place, and that the sort of the visual lightness is important in general in terms of trying to, maintain the sort of continuity of the sort of kind of uninterrupted view down some of the major corridors through Montford. Because historically there were no fences at all. And so I think that's some of where the commission has come from in the past in, trying to soften those with fences with landscaping, and trying to sort of visually, the strong horizontals kind of interrupt that kind of continuity down those main corridors where we haven't seen a real strong pattern of fencing historically. So I think that's some of the context of that, is for those of us that have talked a lot about fences in Montford, and maybe it's, we have to sort of think of each application individually, and there's been some pretty unique circumstances. I think the concern is that we just don't want to be overly visually obstructive in terms of the overall setting that we're dealing with, and that the lightness and transparency of those fences without the real strong horizontals are an effort to reach a little bit of compromise in those places where it is not very clear, and it does give us some latitude to make a contextual sort of judgment call. Other folks? Plenty of folks are quiet. Maybe they're like, why are we talking so long about fences in Montford? I've wondered that myself occasionally over the course of my last 6 years, I think, sitting on the.
Well, I think probably.
Huh?
What did you say?
I said I've wondered myself why we talk so much about fences sometimes in Montford over the last 6 years as I look back, but the standards are what they are.
I can say that I've worked through one set of amendments to the fence standards in my time as a commission, and it wasn't particularly easy as far as what the community wanted more, I think, subjectivity, because it is, like, a lot of things we're looking at oftentimes site specific.
Right.
And I think you also, I mean, maybe this isn't relevant to this particular project, but the previous page, not the list of design standards, but the previous page says mentions prominent properties. And so that's kind of where we were talking about Short Street and Grove Street, these smaller yards are not these like more prominent properties. But again, for this specific application, it is, replacing an existing fence and going with a more historically appropriate fence. And I think to your point, it is always just kind of the goal is to minimize its impact within the landscape, whether it's replacing a fence or entirely new fence. So I agree with Commissioner McDonald in supporting the second design that we received for the fencing. So it meets the standard.
Were there no more questions for the owner?
We need to pause for a moment to open the floor for public comment. Seeing none, we'll close the floor for public comment. Commissioners, additional discussion? Silence means motion.
Are we making a recommendation for which style, or are we letting that be the determination?
I mean, I think I would prefer that we be settled on which one.
Yeah.
And it feels like some consensus, including with the applicant, that the looped top, it would be the preferred of the two choices. But I do think maybe the applicant needs to come back to the front and clarify the choice
Well, I think
at some
that
point.
Yeah, and he included both because he was waiting on quotes for, I think, both.
Yeah.
So I think you need to be clear on which one you feel like best meets the design standards in terms of the, the overall lightness,
Mhm.
and the one that's most architecturally consistent with the house.
I suppose we could probably incorporate that into the motion, couldn't we?
I don't think you have to. I think we just need to be clear which fence style is
Yeah.
approved, and then we'll just make a note in our file.
Okay. And we'll call that like the looped style?
Yeah, I'll put it, I'll make it more specific in the.
Or the one with impale protection? Impale protection.
And this is for both spots, the front and around the parking. Is that right? Because we haven't talked about the
That's a
parking.
great question. We haven't really talked about the parking.
Having, the design standards kind of make it seem like could be a different fence there, given the historic.
I talked about that with the applicant, but then you have 3 different styles of fencing. And because it's a corner lot, it has to have the same qualities as the front yard fence. And so it seems like it would be weird to add a different style. I also don't think it's gonna be like really that noticeable. It's only like 25 by 20 feet or something like that. It's a pretty small section. And that's something that I guess because it's a corner lot, we could, but.
So you're suggesting keep the new section of fencing around the parking would match the fencing going in the front yard?
That's what they're proposing.
Yeah.
And that would allow them to replace that fence along Cumberland Avenue at a later time and not have to worry about, that they could just tie in.
Yeah. Okay.
Makes sense. Okay, I will make a motion. Madam Chair, based upon the evidence presented to this commission, including Exhibit A, application and project description, 5 pages, Exhibit B, photo, Exhibit C, site plan, Exhibit D, alternate fence design images, 3 pages, received June 5th, 2023, Exhibit E, Google Street View image, received June 14th, 2023, and the commission's actual inspection and review of subject property by all members, except I move that this commission approve the certificate of appropriateness based on the following. One,
I'm still trying to figure out how to describe this fence style.
Ornamental luminous here.
one, that the application is to replace existing portion of chain link fence in front yard with new 4-foot-tall metal ornamental picket fence with loop and spear detail at the top. Remove a 25-foot section of chain link fencing in rear yard and construct 20-foot by 25-foot dark colored gravel parking pad edged with, does,
Scratch that, because there's gonna be a
okay,
fence around it, sorry.
parking pad. New section of metal picket fencing will be constructed on 2 sides of parking pad within lot. All work will be in the accordance with attached and approved drawings and plans. All permits, variances, or approvals as required by law must be obtained before work may commence. 2, the design standards for fences and walls found on pages 36 to 37 of the Montfort Historic District Design Standards, adopted on April 14th, 2010, and amended December 9th, 2019, were used to evaluate this request. 3, this application does meet the design standards for the following reasons. A, new fence is replacing an existing historically inappropriate fence. B, new fence will be metal picket, no taller than 4 feet and no more than 65% solid. C, design of new fence is in keeping with the historic character of the neighborhood and architectural style of the house. 4, that the action and improvements proposed in the application before us for a certificate of appropriateness are congruous with the special historic character of the Montfort Historic District.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Based upon the foregoing findings and for the reasons set forth therein, I move the certificate of appropriateness be issued.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Where's my agenda? Right here it is. Okay. Moving to our next item on the agenda, we're moving to old business in Biltmore Village at 1 Angle Street and 10 Kitchen Place. We'll start with our staff report.
Okay, I'm going to be very short with my presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to the architect to go over in detail the revised information that was submitted to you all, and I think he has some additional revised information to share since the submittal came in also. So as you all know, we are looking at this 2-lot parcel along Hendersonville Road, Boston Way, Angle Street, and Kitchen Place within basically what's like the central part of Biltmore Village. Currently, the site is occupied by the little bank building that's in the photo on the right with a surface parking lot and an ATM structure. As obviously we talked about in great length last time, one of the biggest challenges for this project is where do we meet with the height, the facade height limit of 30 feet that's noted in the standards, and then the number of stories that are identified in the development plan for the district. And as a reminder, this parcel is split between 2 to 2.5 story. What's identified in the plan is 2 to 2.5 story redevelopment, and then I think it's either 2.5 or 3.5 to 3.5. 3.5 is noted as the proposed height limit on the west side of the lot. So I think when we got to the end of the conversation last time around, we all agreed that we were comfortable with the applicant went to, obviously, spent a great deal of effort and work to develop the beautiful plan. So we agreed that conceptual renderings to kind of continue the discussion around the height would be acceptable for this particular meeting. So we're really going to focus on that today. In my staff report, I didn't know anything about the different design details or architectural features like I did last time around, because I'm going to reserve my comments on that until we get past the height discussions and we're looking at more refined drawings, so I can give clearer feedback on those elements. So I want to let the architect drive the conversation, so because I know he'll go into great detail. But these are just the revised conceptual elevations that were included in the packet. There's some relation back to some changes with the floor plans, so I'll let him speak to that as well. But I think, in my opinion, it's come a long way in a very short amount of time. If you look at the buildings 1, 2, and 3, which are the corner of Boston Way and Kitchen Place, and then along Kitchen Place, and then Angle Street as well. And they've eliminated an entire story on the building across from the cathedral by sinking the spa area that's within the building. So I think, in my opinion, I'm generally supportive of the direction that they are going in. I do still have some concerns around Building 4. I can get behind certainly the way that they're making the case for facade on that building in terms of measuring it from the grade to where the roof line starts. However, it's still pretty tall. I think you could debate amongst yourselves about whether that's, meeting what could be considered 3.5 stories. I'm not taking a huge issue with it. I still think part of what my personal kind of challenge around that particular corner and along Hendersonville Road is going to be like what I said last time about it kind of, even though they've added more fenestration to the first floor where the ballroom is, I still think it doesn't feel very pedestrian activated on that side. And I think there could be more done to break up that facade to where it didn't feel so vertical against the sidewalk and the street there. And I've talked to Christian about this in our conversations about where my remaining concerns around the height massing scale are really mostly centered on that particular part of the building. They're still showing, like on the commercial building, I would just point out that they're on the commercial building that's on the corner of, I guess, Building 1. They are showing like a step back for that, like they were last time for the top floor. And I think that's a good solution. That's not something we spent a lot of time talking about. It's something that Mr. Griffin brought up last time. And I think, to me, that it's not going to be, hyper visible from, or you're not going to experience that because it will be set back from the front plane of the building beyond the parapet wall. So I feel like that's a successful approach to, the internal programming that they need to make this project work. So I just wanted to kind of make my presentation to you extremely general. This is the only 2 slides that I have to show you, and then I'm gonna let them go through their information.
Questions for Alex?
All right, thank you. All right, let's get you queued up here. Do you need the HDMI? Okay. Yeah, you can unplug my laptop if you want to. Oh, there's just one, I think.
On your screen a little easier because they've basically drawn with trace paper over top of it, so you can see the height difference. If you look close, it doesn't show on that screen very well. Like if you look at these, like if you look at this was previous, and you can see the ghost of that sort of behind doesn't read real as clear. Maybe his drawings will do a little easier job than the stuff out there. Oh, yeah, well, we may never get to it, so.
Go ahead,
All right.
sorry.
No.
We're talking amongst ourselves.
Good-
We're having
good.
a little technical difficulties.
Okay.
with
Good
our
afternoon.
Files taking a long time to load. So you're free to carry on.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Christian Sotil, architect and a preservationist and a planner. It's a pleasure to be back here with you all. And I was, as you know, I was here a month ago. And so I wanted to come back as quickly as I could. I've been drawing nonstop since you saw me. But we spent a lot of time really.
I can relate to that.
Anyway, no, but I wanted well, we had spent so much time talking about it, and we all had it top of mind that I appreciated the opportunity to come back to you in a mode of sort of a workshop mode, and that's what this afternoon is about. So I want to thank you all for that possibility to do that. Also, I'm here with Nick Schumacher and Jason Hammond and Matthew Lehman, who's here in Asheville from the Kessler team. Also, Alex Campbell and Jonathan Cook. From the team with Raven Architects. So we have our folks here if there are any specific questions that I can't answer. Also, I want to continue to thank our friends in the Biltmore Village, the folks at the Cathedral of All Souls, Reverend Sarah Holberg, who I think she just stepped out, and Robert Griffin, Michael McLaughlin, and Martha Fullington have continued to be generous and involved in their time. And over the nearly 2 years that we've been working on this, we have received much input and have continued to evolve the design with that input. So I can say genuinely that it is very much a collaborative effort. And now we're involved with this great group here. So there's lots to do. What I'd like to do is start by walking kind of quickly back through. And you know what I ought to do first, just because we're going to refer to these buildings as buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4. You all were gracious to get a long presentation at the last meeting, and it was not that long ago. So I'm going to sort of jump in with all that background behind us. But I did want to start with this sort of broader conceptual approach that we've been taking from the very beginning with this project, which we are still sort of holding true to, although continuing really to sort of work carefully with how each of these pieces can work. So as we look at that block between Hendersonville, Kitchen Place, there it is, Angle Street, and Boston Way, we really, as we studied the village and we studied the historic plan of the village, realized that this block has such diverse frontages that it deserves a solution that can address each frontage specifically. And that led to an approach that would have multiple building expressions. And and each one having a goal in mind. So building 1, when we talk about that, we're talking about the building at the corner of Boston Way and Kitchen Place. And we see that being very extroverted, a friendly corner. It's in the heart of the mercantile part of the village, opening up onto Biltmore Plaza. As we move down along Kitchen Place, building 2 we always saw as sort of a jewel box and a smaller sort of pavilion frontage. That's evolved, but that's still sort of the goal, that's a special, smaller piece of the puzzle. Then we have a really landmark oriental spruce tree at the corner, which from the very beginning we felt was a great asset to the site that ought to be designed as a key part of the overall massing approach. So that's on the corner. The third building is the one that directly fronts onto the campus of the cathedral and directly fronts to All Souls. And so we've always seen that as a building that should be, in a sense, saluting All Souls and helping complete the churchyard. And then building 4, that's kind of the hardworking building of the program, and it's the one that's diagonally across from the existing Grand Bohemian that was built 15 years ago now. And so we've always seen building 4 as having a role of sort of helping kind of solve the harder parts of the program, but also helping to anchor Hendersonville and complete Hendersonville and complete the streetscape there. So those are the elements, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I wanted to just quickly recap that, so as we go back into detail, that nomenclature makes some sense. So the package we've put together here is conceptual for discussion, and really just in overview, it grows directly out of our last meeting and studying a range of revisions to the massing, and that's really what the package is focused on, to address the comments and to work toward a range of solutions. So what we did was we annotated the existing drawings, which you already have as a background. So we annotated our floor plans. We proposed a series of elevation amendments. We looked at additional context elevation studies. We looked at how this would be affected in the sections, so technically, and then more perspective views, more massing views in the context of the site, and several additional precedent images that became more important as we took the input from this group and brought it forward. So I've summarized some of the big elements of the work. So following that previous submittal and discussion from the Historic Resource Commission, we have restudied it to propose alternate solutions for height, mass, and scale. Some of these solutions are global to the whole project, so I've listed those separately. I wanted to walk through them and then show how they could affect the approach to the design. So in the overall design strategies, the number of stories proposed are to be in compliance with the 1992 Biltmore Village Development Plan, which includes, as Alex mentioned, 2.5 stories along Kitchen Place and 3.5 stories along Hendersonville Road. With the exception that Building 3, which is closest to the Cathedral of All Souls, along Hendersonville, would step down to 2.5 stories. And that's been something that we've been discussing with the cathedral now for many months. So that's one piece of it. The other global piece is in this proposal, these amendments would result in all primary facades not exceeding 30 feet in height. That was something that we spent a good bit of time talking about, a way to map that to the ordinance. Now, at another global level, and this is, I've been drawing a lot, but I've been working very closely with our whole architectural and engineering team to wrestle with the building. And what that resulted in is that the entire first level of the building could be lowered by 2 feet. We had a 20-foot floor-to-floor height, which is sort of a standard height when you're doing a building of this type for the ballroom, for the structure, and the mechanical, and so forth. But we've gone back and said we have to do everything we can to make that as efficient as possible. Let's do the brain damage now and work through that. And we came to a conclusion that there was agreement on the technical team that we could lower it entirely across the entire project by 2 feet for the floor-to-floor height. So it would not be a 20-foot floor-to-floor, it would be an 18-foot. And additionally, we were able, working with the civil team, to lower the finished floor height of the building by an additional foot. So there's a total of 3 feet across the entire project that would be lowered in the proposed amendments. The design concept for multiple expressions for the buildings as they relate to the block, that we have retained, although the character and the massing of some of those has been revised based on the commission's input. And then the trellis structure that we had presented at the passenger area, that's also a piece that we restudied to become a new entry building along Kitchen Place, to create a more complete streetscape. And that would be a 2.5-story massing to coordinate with the Biltmore Village Development Plan. So those are the global strategies. And then building by building, these are the kind of the key changes that we are proposing, amending. Building 1 has been reduced by an entire floor and would present a 2-storied facade on Kitchen Place with a setback level behind the primary facade. So this would lower the effective height of the primary facade for the pedestrian on Kitchen Place by 10 feet. Building 2, we had a lot of discussion about that a month ago, has been restudied. This was the building that had a gambrel roof and more of a cottage character. And we've looked at that entirely differently to really think of it more as a mercantile character in this location. And so I'll show you that. But in the proposal, it would present a 2-story facade to Kitchen Place with a setback level behind that primary facade. So it would lower the total height of the structure by 7 feet, but effectively the primary facade on Kitchen Place would be reduced by 17 feet. We had talked about that tapering down to the church when you come out of the depot. So that's building 2. Building 3, this is closest to the cathedral along Angle Street. Here, as Alex mentioned, we worked again with the team to think about what could we do to work further to reduce the scale there. And by actually recessing part of the program below, we were able to remove an entire floor from that building. And so adjacent to the cathedral would be reduced by 10 feet. By sinking that spa below grade and lowering the entire floor along Angle fronting the cathedral. And then building 4 on Hendersonville Road, here we restudied it to develop a continuous roof line and a transition between the primary facade and the upper roof. So really here the question that as we started the study was how do we create that strong differentiation between the facade and the upper part of the roof of the structure to be in compliance with the ordinance. So that's the kind of the overview of it. To kind of put it back in context with the development plan, the block that we're working in actually sits in 2 different areas, the land use sub areas in the Biltmore Village. Number 1 is high density commercial. Number 1, which is the purple. Number 3 is the part that's on Kitchen Place, which is historic downtown commercial. So those are the 2 zones from the development plan, and we also included in the packet the standards that we're mapping to for these. So for the sub-area 1, the high-density commercial, it's 0 setback development, large-scale development, full blocks, multiple deck parking facilities in the rear and on upper stories. Now here, as you may recall, we're actually proposing to put all the parking subgrade. So we think that's within the spirit of the way that standard is written. Storefront types along the sidewalk, and then 2 to 3.5 stories in height, in an architectural language that draws from original commercial style buildings or later multiple bay type development. And we've been studying those buildings carefully. And then the sub-area 3 has similar characteristics: 0 setback, medium scale development, surface or multiple deck style in the rear or above grade, storefront type at the sidewalk, and then 2 to 2.5 stories in height, in an architectural language to draw from original commercial style buildings or later multiple bay type development. So we really sort of went back with the charge of the commission to map the development standards and the ordinance to the project and to work on that. And so what I've done is I've annotated the floor plans to indicate what happens programmatically with the proposal. And this I can go through, this is more just a quick visual overview. Part of what we would be doing is taking the element that's closest to the cathedral and actually setting it below, well below grade in order to make that program work. And then we'd take the entire floor of the structure and reduce it by 2 feet. And then again by another foot, as I mentioned, with the finished floor being lower. Also, as we're doing this, we're thinking about, as we come back to the architecture along Hendersonville Road, taking in some of the comments that the staff mentioned, the ways to think about the opacity or the transparency along Hendersonville. And we certainly think there are programmatic elements like the ballroom that can do that can be more connected to the street, to the sidewalk there, and to really think about Hendersonville, although it is a very busy auto-oriented corridor, to do things that sort of speak to a more pedestrian, more humane future there. So So that's on our mind as we go. As we go to upper floors, second floor, here we would be lowering that entire floor of building 3 down a level into the space below. We would be revising building 2, and what we're proposing is to develop a new 2.5-story frontage on Kitchen Place to sort of have a more coherent, continuous frontage there and help to sort of get back some of the areas that we're reducing in the project to sort of balance it out. So we have that as what we're referring to as an entry building along Kitchen Place. As we move up on the 3rd level, closest to the cathedral, this would be, at this point, we'd actually be looking down on the roof. That there would be no level on that part of the building. And then along Kitchen Place in the 2.5-story zone, we propose creating a mix of a setback element that would create sort of a parapet wall and a setback level beyond that. And then for the new entry building, actually doing an engaged roof and dormers so that we have some variety in that streetscape. Again, going back to the development plan and looking at strategies to do that. So that's what we're seeing on the 3rd level. And then at the roof level, at this point, all of the buildings on Kitchen Place are now, we're above the roof of those buildings and above the cathedral, or above the building 3 facing the cathedral. And then at this point, we would be in the roof form of building 4. And that would be a 3.5-story approach. And really, this was seen to be kind of a cousin to the existing Grand Bohemian. We sort of started the project with that in mind, that was the place to do it. So from a plan point of view, those would be the approaches that we'd be taking. And then we would, taking that to the elevations. What I've done in the packet is I've put the existing elevation in as it was presented, and which I loved, by the way, and with the permission to not have to re-watercolor elevations, but really to kind of work through this with you all. What I've done is I've taken those and I've done the overlays. So this is what was submitted previously, and then this is the proposed, the concept. And I'm going to zoom in here just so I can walk you through it. So the big picture here is primary facades, never more than 30 feet, and stories always in keeping with the development plan. Those were sort of the 2 big charges for the study. And so as we come to building 1, the friendly corner, what we're doing here is reducing it by an entire story. So it is a 2.5-story building with a 30-foot primary facade. And it would have that setback level behind the parapet. And you can see in the background the parapet of what was presented previously, and you can see what that would do is that kind of brings that down in height. So I'm going to pan over here. This is the new piece of the what we're calling the entry building. That would be a 2.5-story building, and it would still accommodate the passenger drop-off. So you could still go into it. It may be in a bit the way the Bohemian works now, that it sort of has a coherent street front, but it also allows that passenger area to happen in a sheltered space. So it would have that similar function at the ground level, but it would have a street frontage above, and then a roof line above that would be that half-story there to start to bring in a mix of parapet walls and roof lines along Kitchen. So that's the entry building. Now, building 2, this one went through a major existential crisis, and I will say this has been an amazing learning process for me. Learning from Robert, learning from those that work diligently every day to steward the resources here. That the cottage form on Main Street is not the right one. And as much as I was in love with it, we went back to the drawing boards and said, this is on Main Street, there's a different approach. And so what we've done, you can see the gambrel roof in the background. Here we've reduced it by a story, but we've also really just we've changed its DNA to be a very different kind of building. And so here, this is 2 stories on the street with the half-story setback. And what we found effectively, because that gambrel roof was very much street present, that effectively it actually lowers it 17 feet from the peak of the roof down. So it's just a very different way to think about that one. And then if we look beyond, now here's the Oriental spruce, and then we look beyond to the building 3, and you can see the effect of lowering that by another story there. So that's a 10-foot reduction. So the overlays gave us a way to try to understand what we would get, and we sort of took that same approach going around the buildings. So on Engle Street, the proposed amendment here, you can see building 3 with a 10-foot reduction. We would reproportion that facade. We haven't figured that out completely yet, but it's just a different ratio of materials, so probably a higher waistline for the brick and so forth. So it'll be a little bit different, but we think could be very, very successful. And so that's what we're seeing in the foreground in this view. And then we're looking down the street. So we've talked about these buildings. So that's the new building 2, and then the new entry building, and then building 1, the corner building up at the Biltmore Plaza in the distance.
We're looking at that a little bit of an oblique angle, just if those of you who are
Yes.
drawings.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so the one that we're looking at in this view, because it's on Engle Street head-on, is this building, and then these 3 are sort of, going off in the distance.
Excuse me. Is the trellis the former Ortho Sheriff?
Yes.
So it's more of a, there's no way to drive into their house, more of a curbside drop-off?
No, so the entry would still be beneath the structure, so it would be sort of an open loggia at the street. So you would still have the same drop-off function, but then above, instead of the trellis, we had a terrace up there. With the trellis, that would become a facade for that new building.
Reminds me a little bit of like New Morning Gallery with the parking underneath it. There's sort of the massing of the building up above it and the parking below it. Or the sort of storefront we would see in a street frontage of a mercantile building that's just not there, it's open, instead of the sort of big storefront that might be there.
Then coming back on around to Hendersonville Road, looking at the approach there. So here we're looking at the side of building 3, which is really sort of that frontage to the cathedral where it steps down. And then with building 4, we took this approach, and I'll come back to this because I don't think we're there yet. But what I wanted to do was establish, can this work with the 30-foot facade and then the roof above that? So this is the most direct response to that, where it's a continuous roof line at that 30-foot line. And so we established the facade below that to meet the ordinance, and then we have the roof line above. And this is really identical to the solution that's been, that's been built with the existing Grand Bohemian Hotel. So I said, well, let's sort of hit the reset on that to come back to it. So then you'd have essentially 2 floors, and then you'd have 2 floors in the roof line. So that's a 3.5 story. That's a 3.5 story zone. We could say it's 3.5 stories. You might say it's 2 stories and 2 half stories, and it's 3 stories. But regardless, it's within the spirit of being in the roof line with upper levels and not having an overly tall facade at the street front. So you'd have a very definitive cornice line and shadow line. So we looked at that for building 4, and then we carried that just to complete the loop around the block. This was the previous drawing that we were looking at last month, and then taking this concept, these proposed amendments forward, carrying building 4 with the approach of a 30-foot primary facade, continuous roof line, and then here we're looking at back to building 1 with that reduced 10 feet reduced floor, so 2.5 stories there. So that's a summary of the facade. We've also went back to the context elevations to take a look at that again, sort of placing that step down relative to the cathedral. I will say none of the roof lines exceed the peak of the lower gables of the cathedral. We've gone back to very specifically understand those elevations. That was actually the same call to action from the Historic Resource Commission 15 years ago when the Bohemian was done, that would set the roof of the village. And so we would be honoring that same principle on Building 4. This now is the other context elevation inside the village and on Kitchen Place. So here you can see the relationship of Building 3 to the cathedral, and then the mercantile, really truly a mercantile frontage, all the way along Kitchen Place, very much in harmony with the mercantile buildings that are neighboring across the street. So we would have Building 2, we'd have the entry building, which would have that open porte cochere beneath it, and then Building 1 at its reduced height. So we did that, and then we also, a lot of conversation revolved around Kitchen Place at the last meeting, and we didn't have all of those context elevations drawn, so we went back to do that. So in this view now, we're looking at sort of the relationship of Boston Way and the McGahee Building and Building 1. So we can see how those neighboring buildings, both with Chamford Corners, both sort of working in a similar form language with different architectural moves, but sympathetic, hopefully, to each other. So that would be the Boston Way relationship there. Oops. We also include in this view the Biltmore Village Sales Office, Richard Morris Hunt. And it's just, we have gone back, I've field measured every building that was notable for this work, to sort of confirm certain things. And I will just note that the 30-foot rule that's there in the ordinance, if applied to the Hunt building, would actually be the eave below the dormer, below that upper roof line. So most buildings fall in that 30 to 35 foot range, and then the roofs in this case go above that. Older buildings and newer buildings. So I became very confident that interpretation of the 30-foot facade is truly for the facade and not the roof. We also then looked at the neighboring building across Kitchen Place, which is beautiful mercantile building, and how that would relate along that central axis, looking toward the cathedral as the street kind of opens up to kind of shorten the perspective to the cathedral. So those were a series of additional context buildings that we added in and confirmed heights on since the last meeting. I also did a side-by-side of the sections, just so you had the technical information around the proposed amendment. So for Building 1, on the left was the section that we had presented previously, and by reducing it to 30, by reducing a floor, we reduced that facade to 30 feet, and then do the setback floor. And that's also in concert with lowering the first floor by a foot and the second floor by a foot, and as I said before, the entire building by a foot.
Can I ask one just clarification question?
Yes.
When you say that you lowered the first floor by a foot, is that like in relation to the sidewalk? You just set it at its different site elevation?
Correct.
It's lower. So
Correct.
from the sidewalk, is it below the side, generally speaking, below the sidewalk elevation? Or
So
is it
there's actually some rise in the block, and so
towards the middle?
towards the cathedral.
Towards the cathedral.
And so as it rises, we had set the elevation at sort of a middle ground to where the pedestrian entrance had better ADA accessibility and so on. But we said if we are really working to do everything, every idea was on the table. We said everything we can do. We said, can we lower the entire finished floor by a foot, which we can still solve for the ADA entries, and it'll affect how we, but yeah, so it's relative to the sidewalk grade.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the floor to floor is the dimensional 2 feet inside. So then building 2, which was the Gambrel building, in the revised version, it would have a 30-foot primary facade and the setback upper floor, lowering that roof. And then coming back to building 3, this was on the left, what was submitted previously, which there we had the 20-foot floor to floor. So we will have 18 feet floor to floor, but here we've actually pushed the whole floor down into that 18 feet because we've sunk the spa below that grade altogether. So we'll have to figure out how to get down there, which is another problem. But as you can see, it dramatically lowers the building, and we think is a good outcome. And then building 4 in section, of course, everything is lower by 3 feet, as we said, with the 2 and the 1. But here, what's really different is we're holding that line at 30 feet. And previously, we had a gabled-oriented approach, which standing next to a gable, your eye, of course, will travel up, and you could interpret that as the facade. And here we said we will, just as a starting point, say let's put everything in the roof. So everything is a dormer. There are no gables. There's nothing to interpret as a facade. So that would be the change that's in building 4 as we've sketched it up. And then the new entry building is here, which would have, just based on kind of characteristics in the block and what I think would work best with the neighboring parapet buildings, it would be a 28-foot facade, and then that half level expressed as dormers. So those are the sections, and then we came back to the perspective views for the project, taking a whole series of additional views in that we had not drawn previously. So here in this view, we're actually at the forecourt, the churchyard in front of All Souls Cathedral, and this is Angle Street on the right. That's the bank. There's a Wells Fargo bank there at the corner of Kitchen, and we're looking beyond. That's the Oriental spruce at the corner, and building 3 then to the left, the new building 2 to the right, and then the new entry building adjoining that. This was drawn to really put it in perspective with the cathedral in total, but then we did another look at it, kind of zooming in, getting a little bit closer so we could start to think about the articulation of that composition. And so here you can see on Angle Street, building 3, the Oriental spruce. We are going to propose a small fence in the front yard. I'm rethinking that. It's kind of, sorry, I couldn't resist. And then building 2, the entry building, and then building 1 off in the distance. And actually here you're seeing the McGahey building. That would be the corner, the chamfered corner of the McGahey building. So this is a nice view. We're standing at the walkway up to the cathedral here, kind of turned around, looking back down Kitchen. So there's quite a few things going on in that view. Really, I'd call the tree 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're excited about the composition that could be developed there. And then we come down into the, kind of back from the cathedral onto Biltmore Plaza, looking back down. So we have the McGahey building on the right and building 1 just beyond. And this is really about that sort of framing the view to the cathedral and looking at how it descends as you approach the cathedral, and really having a two-sided street that is mercantile in character. And then as you look to the right on Boston, this is where building 4 would then convert to being not a parapet building, but a roof-oriented building as you head toward Hendersonville and toward the Bohemian. And then this is out on Hendersonville Road. This is really a view sort of looking across the street, so to kind of confirm the importance of the setting down at the end cap. But then it also shows sort of this long 30-foot line of Building 4, which we've been giving some additional thought to. But we wanted to sort of start with that as a way of sort of framing it around those two guiding documents. And then coming back from the other direction, the apse of the cathedral heading north, and what you would see with Building 3, which is really very referential to the parish hall of the cathedral, so sort of completing that. And then Building 4 stepping up beyond that. So we did include some additional precedent images that seemed to be more important now. We had some images in our initial design package. This mercantile building, I think, is very emblematic of the Biltmore Village way. The sort of the parapet and the roof line sort of working together and developing sort of intervening roofs. So this was really an inspiration for the new building too, to kind of share the thought process. And then also, the elegance of some of the earlier 20th century buildings, the O'Teen Bank building, which incidentally is 35 feet tall, just a note. But I think all of sort of this development of Biltmore Village as a concept and then its evolution is part of why we're all here, because it's still a living place and we're working on it. And so these are all part of the story and working with the vision. Certainly the shaped movements and the parapets, the elegance of the parapets in those early 20th century buildings is something we're very attracted to. I think it's really very, very much a signature of the village. And then, we came back, of course, to the existing Bohemian, mostly with the thought of how to think about Building 4. And noting also, it actually does a fairly distinctive division of massing at a lower height too. And that's actually something I've been thinking about since we submitted the sketches a few weeks ago, because I think that all adds up. And so there may be more still to learn from that. So that's the overview of the package. I think if it's okay, maybe I can share just one additional thought that we've been working on relative to Building 4, because I think we saw it, we said, we think we're getting there, but it feels like it would need more work. I wanted to start at a baseline, but talking with Alex, actually visiting again with the folks at the cathedral, I think we came to how else might we start to think about that with the interpretation that we've been discussing. And so this is another way to approach it, using the same basic approach, but starting to break it up more in the spirit of the existing Bohemian is here. And what I thought we could approach it as a kind of corner pavilions that could have that same horizontal offset. We've actually set back from our property line, so we could actually cantilever part of that back out, because it's actually still very much on the property, and develop that extra horizontal division, and also develop more of a pavilion massing, so that Building 4, rather than being one long building, could actually have two pavilions and a center component that could be articulated differently. And maybe some limited use of gables would help to. We certainly had a very gable-oriented approach initially, but maybe with a continuous roof line, there's still a version of dormers and gables. So this is just a sketch, but I wanted to also share that in the spirit of tonight's discussion. Again, and then I looked at the New Morning Gallery building as well relative to that. That was a piece of the context that obviously it's a newer building, but it's part of it, and sort of looking at what those two would be. And I will actually point out that the height to its roof is 28.5 feet, and then the roof line goes well above that, over 40 feet. So it also reminds me that this is an interpretation that as far as facade and roof that this board has made historically and on more recent projects. So that's the architecture side. If I can add one more idea, which is unrelated, but I want to get your thoughts and feedback on it tonight. It has to do with the streetscape and trees. We've been having a bit of discussion about the trees along Kitchen Place, which are sweet gum trees, and we have One of the staff comments was to provide additional clarity on a couple of things. One was identifying paving materials for courtyards, which we've done. That's probably for another meeting, but we have done that to make sure that we're using brick, and it's a brick that's compatible, that's part of the specification of the village. But the other one was the clarification on trees being retained or removed and tree protection. I want to just put this on your radar, just so that could maybe be part of your discussion tonight. So the image that's on screen now was the submittal site plan that was submitted last month. And what we have done in the planning of the site was we looked at retaining the sweet gum trees along Kitchen Place, and sort of designed the entry and exit points for the porte cochere around existing trees. In later, there's been some discussion following that those sweet gum trees are not per the development plan. They're not per Olmsted's original vision for what trees should be on Kitchen Place. And so, so another approach that has been, and our Stephen Lee with SiteWorks has been working on this. He said, "Look, here's the other way to do this." And you would essentially remove the existing sweet gum trees along Kitchen Place and then replace those in really in a similar location, but it would be with the linden trees per the Olmsted plan. So I would like to get some feedback on that, or at least some discussion on that. Just as a visual, these are the trees that are there now. They certainly have scale. They've been there for a long time. They have additional life, but not forever. So anyway, that's just one other item related to the staff comments and some of the thinking around that we've also been considering. So with that, I appreciate your time and your service, and I'm look forward to any questions that I might be able to answer.
Questions for the applicant? Okay. I think we'll take just a quick pause and open the floor for public comment. I feel there's probably a break coming.
Okay.
Folks here in a minute, but I would like to, and feels likely that there's some public comment out there for this particular application. So I'm going to open the floor for public comment. Go ahead and start. For those that are going to be speaking for this application, if you'll just remember to state your name before you get started talking.
My name is Robert Griffin, President Griffin Architects, PA. Our firm wrote the development plan, and I personally petitioned the city of Asheville to create the historic district and served on the committee to create the guidelines for the historic district. I have to say, Christian has been wonderful to work with. They have been, as an architect, I can empathize with him because of the challenge he has with his program. And I have run against that same thing many times before, where I've gone to the city of Asheville and asked for relief from a setback or something, and it was driving me crazy because I couldn't make my design work, satisfy the program, and comply with the law. And all of you architects all here know that frustration, and height is particularly one of them. One thing that I'd like to speak to fact, not opinion, when we were involved in helping with the Bohemian project, which we consulted with on that project, the annex was originally asked before the HRC to be the same height as the Bohemian, 40 foot. And the HRC said, no, it needs to be down to 30 feet. And if you drive past the Bohemian and you look over at the annex, you can indeed see how it is more in scale with the Biltmore State Ticket Office. So that, once it crossed over Hendersonville Road, the scale dropped down by stepping down. as to your remarks about my suggesting a setback as a possible solution to redefine principal facade, I see it's a 5 or a 6 foot setback, which to me, personally, as an architect, I don't see that to be enough unless you're right on the sidewalk or something like that. But as you get back from the building in perspective, it's going to read like the addition on the top of the S&W, if any of you have seen that before. It's also, it was my understanding from the last meeting that there was a desire to see more modeled or detailed 3D images rather than romantic sketches. And I'm personally having a hard time understanding the impact of some of these taller elevations. Christian does a beautiful job with his watercolors, and they're really beautiful. His designs have constantly improved every time. And I think that he has taken the bull by the horns and made concessions with his design. And I personally think it's time for the owner to make concessions with their program so that he can do his job better. And I strongly say that we should not set a precedent for redefining the principal facade to be less over 30 feet. And there have been variances done in that before, but not with habitable space above that line. And I think it would be a mistake. I apologize to Christian, but as I have gone through this and tossing and turning and sleeping and thinking about it, I had to give myself a good talking to, I think is the expression. And I just can't, I can't get with it. And I recognize that we did say 2 to 3.5 stories, but we had no idea the first story would be 20 foot tall when we did the development plan. So that has completely changed. I went through a month or more working with Christian and never noticed it. You know, and it's just, his drawings and proportions are great. He made a barn look like a jewel box. You know, it was an amazing act of what rendering can do. And I, for one, think that it's time to get more technical and follow the guidelines. Thank you.
Hi, Dean Sarah Hurlbert from All Souls Cathedral. I speak on behalf of myself with the support of the Vestry of All Souls, which is the sort of executive board, as well as Bishop Jose McLaughlin, who's been consulted with about this project. I can't envision a better group to design, construct, and run the hotel in our neighborhood. Progress and development really are the engines that fuel our communities, so long as they recognize people as neighbors, as assets, rather than obstacles or impediments. And I'm grateful for the relationships that they have built and are continuing to build among the businesses and residents of the neighborhood. Mr. Sotil and all the folks involved in this project with the Kessler Group want to enhance the village as they develop property that they own, and they want to be good neighbors in the process. And I appreciate that. Now, I'm impressed by the adjustments that have been come up with in the design to better complement the current architecture and the guidelines for the village. And I personally believe that a larger structure on Hendersonville Road is not going to detract from the business done there or the feel of the village itself, especially because I happen to notice all the time the walking patterns around there, and there's not a lot of people going down Hendersonville Road to take a good look at the Hardee's parking lot, or, you know, to really study the architecture around that gas station. So just with what is there right now, I don't see any sort of problem having a good-looking building that's a little taller on Hendersonville Road, while it is more in line with the rest of the functionality of the village and the look of the village along Kitchen Place. And my hope is that we can recognize, well, and I also have to say that, you know, I'm helping to shepherd the biggest building in the place. You know what I mean? We've got, talk about a roof line, holy cats. I'm glad I'm not the rector that has to, you know, put a roof on that place like that happened years and years and years ago to the tune of $4-point-something million, right? So I appreciate that we're the big one on the corner, right, that everybody else is trying to adjust to. And so my hope is that we can recognize the opportunity that we have in this project to enhance a space, to enhance the village, and to bring the best structure that we can, along with the best plans for enhancing everyone's experience of the village. And I appreciate this. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the concerns. And I think we've got something really good on our hands, and progress comes. And I, for one, have been trying to tell my people that, you know, if you're not at the table, you are on the table. And I'm excited to be at the table in this project, because I think it's going to be great. Thank you.
I just want to say I was 5'11" and a half before I started working with Christian, so Tito, he's done amazing things for me. No, this has been a great project to work on.
Can you state your name for me?
Yeah, I'm Martha Fullington, and I'm a retired architectural historian and preservation specialist with the state and other entities. But anyway, this has been an interesting project, and I just want to go backwards for a minute from an architectural history point of view to explain to you why height has been a bugaboo in Biltmore Village since the beginning. When Biltmore Village was laid out, it was laid out in the shape of a fan, with the church as the hinge of that fan, with all of the streets radiating out from it. And so geographically, the church was very definitely the focal point. But more than that, topographically, it was the focal point, but the church was the highest point in Biltmore Village. And that was no accident. They actually brought in 6 feet of fill dirt to raise the site of the church before the first brick was laid. And so that was something that Hunt and Olmsted and Vanderbilt and Smith all worked on together, so height has been an issue for a long time. One of the things that they wanted to make sure was that the church was evident and the focal point, whether you were coming from the north or coming from the south. They wanted that to be the most important building that you saw from any angle. When George Vanderbilt had everything laid out, he wanted to have a house of worship as the frontispiece to all that lay beyond that, meaning the Biltmore estate. So he wanted a building that was grand enough to be a house of worship, but he wanted it humble enough to be a church for a small village, which is what Biltmore Village was in the beginning and is still today. And so that relationship between the church and the buildings is very important. And I know that y'all know that, and I just wanted to reiterate that. I wanted to thank the Kessler folks, and especially Christian, for taking all of your comments to heart and so seriously, because I think I was amazed when we saw how things had started to come down inside, and specifically the building, the spa building that's right across the street from the church. That was just a grand effort on your part, and we really do appreciate it. I think that we're all going to have to get used to or over or something the fact that we've been used to Biltmore Village being this quaint little village. And we're getting ready to introduce 4 new buildings.
and lots of people and activity coming because of this hotel. And I think that that's just a fact that we're all going to have to figure out for those of us who spend a lot of time in Biltmore Village, whether it's at All Souls or whether it's at Corner Kitchen. But I think we've got to realize that Biltmore Village is going to evolve as this hotel comes in. And again, thank you so much for caring about us, and thank you all for listening.
Good evening, Benjamin Mitchell. I've been sworn in. I want to echo many of the sentiments that have been expressed by others tonight. The Kessler Group has been extraordinary to work with and has collaborated with myself and many others, stakeholders, property owners in the village. I think we're getting close to something that we can live with down there. There's work to be done. But the comments that were received in informal meetings, I believe back in February or March, were taken to heart. The renderings are simply that at present. I would like to see actual heights in relation and scaled appropriately to other buildings so that we can truly understand what it looks like for those of us who live and work here every day, myself included. I'm sure these people can do this for us, and the points that Mr. Griffin made with regard to the intent and spirit of the guidelines must be seriously considered. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing color palettes, actual traffic flow patterns, how guests will function, and hopefully help us all prosper in the village. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Neil Reed. I'm the trustee for the John Cram Trust, who owns the McGahee building, as you call it, or we call it the McGeechee building. Somehow in historic designation as on the National Register, it lost a C. But we do have an awesome fence in our parking.
Oh, gosh.
that's looped and circular. So when I refer to it as McGeechee, it's just because that's what I've done for 30 years. So I've worked for Mr. Cram for decades, and am now, my primary office is in Biltmore Village. And I'm like I said, I'm the trustee for his trust, which own the McGeechee building and New Morning, and New Morning occupies the upper floor of the McGeechee building. So it's Bellagio and New Morning that occupy both buildings. In looking at a lot of the comments from the last meeting, which I was out of town and couldn't attend, I'm very impressed with the Kesslers and Christians' changes. They've been great neighbors. We love working with them. They're right across the street beside us. Now they're going to be on the other side. Our concern really is in looking at the development plan in '92. I think Robert could speak to this point, Mr. Griffin, about why there was a deck parking in the rear of some of the requirements in the development plan. And that was, the intent was to reduce density. So density as relatable to the development plan was addressed in a couple of different ways, also with the roof height. So I'm also, if you look at the drawing or the picture of New Morning and those little cupolas you saw on top, those are about 20 feet by 20 feet, and they're uninhabited, and they're just corner caps. So that roof space is 30 feet. And we did that in 2000, in the renovation that added that. John didn't want to add and go beyond the 30 feet. His architect is Jim Samsel, who I'm sure would be glad to speak to you about staying within the parameters of the development. So, the mass and scale and the setback concerns that I heard earlier along Hendersonville Road, I think those are real concerns that we need to work with them on, because they're looking at putting 2 loading docks and an entrance for a 3-level underground spot on Boston Way. which currently doesn't have enough room for two-way traffic. So we can't change the road, we can change Biltmore Village. So how do those things work with the traffic pattern? So I think that maybe looking at changing Building 4 with setbacks could help that, or putting an entrance to a deck on Hendersonville Road. Because the traffic pattern is just, it is something that it's really going to have to be looked at. I understand that's not your purview, but aesthetically, I would love to see scaled drawings. I think the Biltmore office on the north side of New Morning, you're not seeing the annex behind it, and the annex does reach well above New Morning and the addition to the Mengichi building. But other than creating Boston Way, I think with the current setback and the scaling that you're not seeing that it's really going to become an alley, really, for service. It is not pedestrian friendly, I think, if we have loading docks and a garage entrance just 30 feet off of Hendersonville Road. So, again, my concerns are massing congruency in the neighborhood, kind of looking at what fits. This is 100,000 square feet. It's monstrous, which is great. We want, we're not opposed to development and want to work with our neighbors, but I think scale, density as intent for the development plan in Biltmore Village needs to be addressed as well. But, again, that question of 30 feet, what is a primary facade? Does the continuous roof on the if it provides occupancy, it's a little different. And that provides a whole nother floor as drawn. So would ask you to look at that, and thank you for your time.
Any additional public comment? Okay, I'm going to close the floor for public comment. Wouldn't mind about a 5-minute break. Is that okay? I hate for y'all to sit even longer, but it'd be lovely to have a little bit of a quick break. Okay, 5 minutes. Then I get to do the gavel one more time today. That's my whole plan. That's it. More gavel time.
Oh, no, it is one more time, isn't it? It's a solid plan. It's a solid plan, man.
That's why New Morning Gallery ads are fine arts.
Oh, yeah?
Because,
Oh, man.
I've never seen this man before.
I sat on the Metro Purchase Association representing the church for years. After Stan Collins died, I never knew who took over and
It's too deep. That's almost like what we're doing in Park Sheriff. She might just point that out in terms of that retail building. It's got a very similar look to that. Yeah, just not very much of it. Just this question about
Yeah. As far as some of the TRC related comments,
It is impressive to see. You know, at the hotel, it was neat to see it the first time today. It was here somber today, and just like y'all had time to honor the backgrounds. Appreciate it. This is great. I really think it's gonna get there. Because the height is, and like I said, the height is, since it was first built.
Oh.
The margarita.
How come I never thought to do that?
You're good, laugh.
Seriously.
But we could take you out of here.
That's right.
Give you a couple margaritas and go, see what happens.
That's right.
I know, well, I was just saying to Emily that she should have had a picture of all margaritas for right now as we roll her out.
You know what, that's what I said when we had that 6-hour hearing. I told Janice beforehand, I was like, well, I was meeting with our whole legal staff, and I was like, I feel like the only thing I could have to feel prepared for this meeting is like a emotional support animal and Argentina. So Janice brought me a picture of one of her dogs and a little water bottle that looked like a flask.
Oh my God,
That's amazing. That's amazing.
That was really fun.
I think my strongest memory, but not the only one, but one of the strongest memories I have is that we had a couple of virtual meetings that were just enormously good.
That was my first one.
And it was when Gail was still on the commission.
Oh, and her cat.
Grumpy face, right in the
Just
camera
like,
on her
Mom,
side.
to get off the
We're
thing.
done with this meeting.
That was so fun.
That is perfect. I need a screenshot really fast. That was amazing. And I loved every minute of that little cat's face on that screen at like 9 o'clock at night.
Yes.
That was a lot.
Yeah, it was, for sure. I can't think of what the longest meeting has been. I think we were here till 10:30 was for when we had the multi-family development in Bonneville the first time.
I missed that meeting. I did. And that was the one where there was like, you had to put TVs and stuff upstairs.
Nobody.
Oh, the new person.
And then I came down.
And there's, not everyone would fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I came down here and there was someone said,
Oh, that was a lot. I missed it.
Jennifer Martin did it.
first time we came here. Emily was saying one of her favorite.
It's had
So this dimension right here, this setback is, well, from his perspective, that was his comment. This is not a big enough dimension. Yeah, like, cause you're, right, his concern was that it really is blurring this requirement. In part because it's not a very strong setback. It's only 5 or 6 feet. There's a dimension on one of these drawings that shows the setback, like what dimensions it. And I don't remember where it is. But, oh, it's here. I'll show you where it is. Yeah, and I'm gonna speak to that a little bit because I think it's like 6 feet. So that green area is what that setback is. And then this pops up.
Good line, it's 5 foot 11.
This is the the section that's got the sloping roof on it. Yeah. So.
Oh, I see,
Yes. Although, yeah. All right, I'm ready. Ready? Here's your boy. Every count, that's why.
Oh, look at her. That's her last chance.
I can't, I might today. Sometimes we don't do it at the end, but I might today. Just
I
to
bet you
send
will.
us out. You think I will? Well, I can't imagine. Can't imagine doing
Now
that.
we're scaring people.
Yes. Thank you for indulging our little quick break there. All right, so we've closed the floor for public comment. I think we're at the sort of discussion phase. If we've got questions for the applicant, or if y'all would like to speak to any of the comments or provide us with any additional information, that's sort of the phase that we're in at this point. And I'm happy to sort of kick us off on the discussion, if it's okay with everybody else. I think I appreciate the direction things are going, for sure. I think we've made a lot of very significant steps in the right direction. I also, I think we all expect the project to get more detailed and to get us, more clear drawings, but for me, I think that the level of drawing information that you all provide at this time is appropriate for where we are in the process, and I think that while they lack some specificity, I think in general, the scale of what you're drawing as it relates to the other buildings, presuming obviously that y'all are measured and are drawing to scale, I think is providing that information the way you did, I think was successful for the stage of the work of the project that we're in terms of where we are with the conversations around height and massing. Obviously, we're going to get to a place where we get more specific and more dimensioned and more detailed in terms of the sort of architectural detailing that happens around the buildings. But I think getting scale and massing and heights sort of in a good direction is a really important step, because the details won't matter if we can't really come to the place where those things are feel good to everybody. So I appreciate that, and I think that in my general impression is that we've certainly made a lot of steps in the right direction, and it's starting to feel a lot more congruous with just in the overall context and the overall scale and mass of the buildings. I do appreciate the concerns around density and traffic and loading docks and garage doors and all of those things. I think those are things that should be part of y'all's consideration and continued study. To the extent that we have much in the way of influence over that with the way the standards are written, sort of a little bit outside of our lane to some extent.
Yeah, it's obviously not germane to the discussion, but at the same time, the commission doesn't have purview over that. Just that it's not that it shouldn't be part of the discussion necessarily from an overall development standpoint, but those are things, parking, transportation issues, those are going to get ironed out in the rest of the planning review process. So they have not, there's a bunch of other steps. So there's a technical review, planning and zoning commission, as well as that this is a conditional zoning, so that there will be conditions that might be also completely different than what the zoning requirements are. So I just want to be clear that that will get worked out. So we'll really, we can talk about that. Focus, as you pointed out, should be design, tied back to the design.
I would also, applaud the efforts from last meeting. You can see where you've taken our suggestions and, taken good steps to get closer. And also, I didn't really get a chance to comment on this last time because I had to leave early, but I also just really appreciate the care you've taken with the style of the buildings to really make it feel at home with the rest of the buildings in the village. And I think the improvements that you brought today even, further make that true. So I'm glad to see building 2 that was barn-like. I like the changes that you made to that. I feel like it fits a lot better. And then also the later drawing that you showed us that had sort of the 3 section for building 4, kind of breaking up that main facade. I think that was also a really nice idea. Just kind of keep that from being so, I guess, large looking, for lack of a better word, because that building is, you know, a large mass, and breaking it down into sections may help the feel of that be more like smaller, multiple buildings. As far as the height, I feel like you've addressed the concerns that we had, but like Chair Kite has said, I think there's still a little ways to go. I think the point that was brought up about the setbacks on, I guess, buildings 1 and 2, where you've got the first 2 stories in front, and then I think like a 6 or 7 foot setback. Kind of getting some perspective on, you know, from the street view, how visible are those? From a little bit further back, what kind of impact are you seeing even with that setback? So a little bit more information on that, but I think that will come with the more detailed drawings and perspectives.
Yeah, I think a deeper setback certainly isn't gonna hurt the view, right? I think certainly if you're walking right on the sidewalk on that side of the street next to the new building, you're not gonna really perceive that setback extra story on the top, but from across the street, maybe you would, and sort of the further back it gets and the closer it gets to the line on the property between 2.5 stories and 3.5 stories, you know, it feels more appropriate. I think especially on Kitchen Place, which is the most pedestrian of all the streets, where there's presumably going to be guests at the hotel roaming around all of Biltmore Village, you know, interacting with all of the rest of the businesses in that sort of commercial hub of Biltmore Village. I think that's, in my mind, really critically important, the scale right there. Maybe less so on Hendersonville Road, although I tend to agree with Emily that this sort of really long, big mass on Hendersonville Road, it's already sort of feeling like that on Hendersonville Road. We've got a lot of really tall stuff happening right on the edge there, and we're gonna lose daylight, we're gonna lose, you know, I just don't want it to get so tunneled in that little corridor, those couple of block stretches right there, that we make it even less hospitable to pedestrians, because presumably we should be encouraging more pedestrian access across Hendersonville Road. And that if we make it less hospitable because we just assume it's okay to put these giant mass buildings on the corners, I think people are gonna be even less inclined to continue to walk across the street there. And so, you know, to the extent that we pay attention to the scale, especially at the corners where people pause and stop and walk across the street, I think is appropriate. I think the, you know, lower horizontals, the idea that we could cantilever, the softness of I think some of the successful things, for example, at the Grand Bohemian, is the landscaping that sort of softens the edge of those buildings. You know, New Morning Gallery successfully does that as well, this sort of really appropriately scaled kind of right up next to the sidewalk kind of stuff that happens there. I think that's important. I know you have something to say.
I think everything, I think buildings 1, 2, and 3 have come within closer, as a good envelope. And then I'm concerned on 4, when you come down Hendersonville Road and Thompson and crossing the Swananoa, there's the Grand Bohemian, the one where you can drive into, is taller than the second Grand Bohemian. And I don't know I assumed that that height difference was a sightline for the church. And then I think you're getting well above that, and that's a pretty view of, you're descending into the village across Swananoa, and that roof on 4 with the 2 stories, or the 2 rows of rooms above 30 feet. I'd like to see what those heights are compared to the Grand Bohemian. I'm calling it Grand Bohemian 2. Is it ever? All right. Yeah. Because I think that's going to really crowd an important part of the village, of seeing that church steeple. Activation along the streets, echoing a little bit of that. It's a shame that Boston Way is such a shopping area as you turn and go around with New Morning and the other businesses to try and activate and have less. It's a trick. I don't know how you're gonna where loading docks go, but on that narrow street, I could see the concern of some of the comments. That's what I have as far as envelope goes on what you presented, which I appreciate your presentation immensely. Thank you.
I really admire the attempt to reduce the height of this project. I'm studying the building sections, which are very informative. And I'd like to hear from the architect what his definition of primary facade is. That seems to be the rub. It appears that it's the foremost vertical face of an exterior wall. If so, these revised sections seem to comply with the 30-foot mandate or guideline. How should we understand the definition of primary facade? Seems like there's at least 3 or 4.
Sure. No, I can address, I think you said it already, that it is the leading facade of the building at the street, or as close to the street as the leading facade is, and it's the vertical surface of that facade. And as I went through the village, looking at historic and contemporary examples, that was borne out in all the examples that I saw. There are, in fact, some parapet buildings like the Otine building, even the McGahey building, that actually are taller than 30 feet. But the principle is still there, that they're in that 30 to 35 foot range. But then you see buildings like the old Biltmore Village ticket office, where the roof line begins at 30 feet. The vertical surface of the building ends and the roof begins. Historic buildings, and then contemporary buildings like the New Morning Gallery, that its vertical surface ends at 30 and then its roof begins. And the Grand Bohemian, its vertical surface ends at 30 and roof begins. So I felt like that is an interpretation that is authentic to the ordinance. And we went back to everything that we studied with this package that we've talked about this evening, with that as the mandate. So that guided every decision that we made.
And I would say, I think in the current proposed changes that you've made, that 30-foot line is far more clear than it was in the previous design. And I would tend to agree in looking at some of the historic sloped roof structures and where that break happens between the primary facade and when the roof starts. Gables, I think, break that a lot. And so moving away from the gables in the current sketches that you provided, I think make that 30-foot dimension a lot more clear for me. And I think that this sort of primary facade at the street puts that setback in sort of a weird spot a little bit. There's a very clear 30-foot dimension in those sections that seems to support the precedents around the district for me. I do think that the side of the property that's at 2.5 stories, I think the sections don't really read 2.5 stories so much as 3 stories. So maybe that's a little bit, it's 30 feet, but not 3.5 stories, building 1, not 2.5 stories. So how do we, there's so, and I think with standards really in most of the districts that we have, there's this sort of, how do you apply that standard in a specific setting or a specific location or a specific site or and when we have this sort of very strong 30-foot dimension and a 2.5-story thing, those two things, dimension-wise don't always line up necessarily. I don't know. I think when we start to if we look at your new entry building, for example, that's far more convincing as a 2.5-story building than a flat-roofed, technically 3-story building with a setback and a parapet. Although I think it's pretty strongly 30 feet, even though it's 3 stories. In terms of what we would consider the primary facade. So I think there's some grayness there that I think is maybe more successful in the entry building in being able to do both.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to choose which of those guidelines to prioritize if they both can't be met.
Right. And so I would say entry building, I gotta go scroll one more, is more clearly 2.5 stories than building 1, for example, which I think in section certainly reads as 3 stories.
I think the tricky thing though is that the development plan also refers back to the commercial buildings in this part of the district as being like what they should be looking towards to new development.
Right.
Those are obviously the 2 commercial style buildings, building 1 and building 3.
Right.
And I know I've harped on this some last time, but to me it's more of a form thing than just black or white. Number of stories. I mean, I understand that, some commissioners might make a different interpretation, obviously. Sorry, I'm not sure these mics are really that helpful anyway.
Get megaphones.
Try the other one. And I tend to think building 3 is pretty successful in terms of scale. I think sinking the spa certainly was a really strong move to help with that. I think that's maybe scale-wise the most successful of it's gotten the farthest closest towards what I think we feel good about. But I think in general, the context elevations, the perspective views all feel pretty well scaled. If we recognize that there's a good bit of design development that needs to happen in terms of the detail, and to sort of prove that the scale that we've created in these sort of high-level concept sketches really works in real life, then, I think I feel pretty good about it.
I also really appreciated the contextual, showing it next to the adjacent buildings. That was really helpful, seeing how it's relating, to the church and
To the McGeechee building.
The McGeechee buildings.
Now that we know what that is.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a significant difference from this month to last month in how I feel about the overall scale. So.
Can we open back up for public comment?
Yeah. I guess we can. I think that's fine. We'll open the floor for public comment. State your name again, please.
Hi, it's Benjamin Mitchell again. Thanks for hearing me. One thing that may be helpful to all of us as we look at this site and the historical context of it, and I've not been able to locate a photograph yet of what the Arrakis family grocery store looked like that was previously located on this site. I think there was also a Trantham family grocery store. It may be under one or both of those names. And perhaps there's some opportunity in your research to pick up on some of those historic details and incorporate that in a modern building. There's a book called Around Biltmore Village that identified the Arrakis family for me, and I'll be happy to provide a copy of that to the applicant and this body. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? We'll close the floor for public comment again. Commissioners, I think that certainly there's some more iteration to happen from the applicant. I want to make sure that we get a chance for everyone to say the things that we think are important that can help guide their further work. I also would like for you to have an opportunity to ask any questions or to comment on anything based on the feedback that you've gotten that would give you some, good direction forward in terms of how to take the next iteration of what you're doing. Commissioners?
Madam Chair, I have a question for the architect. I recall, and maybe I recall incorrectly, that you said something to the effect of there was no point in the new building was higher than the lowest gable peak of the cathedral. Could you restate that, please?
So the array of gables, at the lower portion of the cathedral were used as a benchmark 15 years ago for the development of the Bohemian, and so we sort of began with that as a baseline for the new. So the tallest building in the entire complex is not adjacent to the cathedral, but it still honors that same principle. Building 4 essentially uses the same floor-to-floor height that was developed in the existing Bohemian. Actually, I brought that section just for reference, where you have there. Yeah, you have that offset, which was also something that we talked about, which I think is actually it's something that adds to sort of breaking that massing down. But the roof line begins and then it ends at 49 feet tall, which is the height of that gable, the peak of that gable relative to the village. So we've used that same thinking in the development of the Building 4 section.
Pull up maybe one of your, the contextual elevation studies that you can just show us that line that you're referring to?
Sure.
I think the cathedral's in most of the, couple of them, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So this line here, I can't draw on this computer, but
Come on.
I wish I could. This line here it's designed to not exceed the peak of the low gable of the cathedral.
So the total height to the, if you would, ridge line of that roof on Building 4 is 49 feet.
Correct.
Okay. So you've got 30 feet from grade to the eave, and then 19 feet from the eave to the ridge line.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Do you know the height of the Grand Bohemian 2?
The section showed it.
I don't have that height. It's a block of rooms, but I don't have that height. But I've heard your comment, and we'll certainly
Great.
add that into the three-dimensional views as well. I think that was very helpful.
Alex, what is the height limit along Hendersonville Road in the development ordinance, in the UDO?
This parcel is in CB2, and so the height is But it's a conditional zoning, so they can ask for, you know, whatever height they want to exceed 40 feet.
Okay.
I have another question related to building height. The discussion about dropping finished floor elevations. I'm sure you know that most of the buildings in the floodplain. What is the base flood elevation that we should be aware of? You see this building drop, and then have to be raised up again because
No, I think that we would be using flood protection to protect it in that event. And so, and I probably shouldn't be speaking on behalf of our civil engineering team.
Sorry, you need to come
You
up
gotta
to
come up.
mic.
Sorry about it.
Were you sworn in too?
Were you sworn in?
Yes,
Okay, state your name, please.
Jonathan Cook.
Thank you.
All right, so the base flood elevation for the site is 2001 and a half. So that is approximately 5 feet lower than the grade plane that we're going to have. So we're planning on using CMU walls for all of the solid walls around the building that will be designed for hydraulic pressures. And all the openings in the buildings will have deployable floodproofing systems that will deploy in the event of a flood to protect all the openings.
Is that a similar strategy to what you did at the Grand Bohemian?
I can get back to you.
The Grand Bohemian
Elevator.
raised, yeah.
They just did a
Oh,
French
right,
drain.
because there's parking, huh?
They just did a French drain.
Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried that approach.
This methodology that Jonathan just described is actually one that we have done. Kessler has a hotel in Charleston that has a similar system.
It's pretty common
And we
in the
just
Low
finished
Country.
one in Savannah as well with a similar system. So integrating that from a detailing point of view is very important to ensure that the attachment points are concealed, and that's a whole other conversation, but it's one that we're certainly familiar with.
And I made this point last time, but I'm gonna say it again, it's not every developer that would come into Biltmore Village and be willing to do underground parking, as well as not, flood-proof the building and go the other route, like the 10 Brook Street and build,
Yeah.
above the required height for flood. So I just feel like that's important as part of the conversation around this development.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty key decision in getting us off on the right foot with regards to scale and massing and height, for sure.
I have another question about the setback of those upper stories on buildings 1 and 2. How far back does it step before that additional story or half story, whatever you want to call it, starts?
6 feet, right?
Yeah. So what we've shown, this is the floor plan, the annotated floor plan. So for building 1, that would set back 6 feet from the parapet. And then the parapet, of course, has some of its own height, so you have sort of a more concealed floor that's above that. But is also, and I think really designed to be recessive, just to jump ahead a little bit, the materiality, the color palette, the elements of that need to be treated really sensitively so that it's not presenting itself as a floor, but presenting itself as almost like a mechanical service enclosure. So it's meant to be very quiet in the background. And that would, of course, come through further design, but that's the spirit of it. Where the middle building is very roof, it's presenting a roof, the entry building, so that it creates that variety in the street is what we're thinking. We have worked on rooftop additions on historic buildings in the past, and we found 6 feet to be a very successful dimension because it clearly differentiates itself from the primary facade. It creates a break, but it also feels intentional too, because there are certainly going to be points where you will see it. So it has to be thought of as, when seen, that it's attractive and it's seen as a composition. So I think that's what's on our mind as we move into that stage of the design. But the 6 feet is one that we have direct experience with and have found it to be successful.
Alex, do you know of other situations where the commission has seen, aside from the S&W, a setback upper story?
On the Flatiron building most recently,
And-
there was an addition already up there, but they actually built out the addition even more, or are building it out at present. So that's the only one I can think of.
And do you know what that setback is?
I don't, I can find
Yeah.
that in our plans or our files or whatever, but, it varies because we're like programming some of the rooftop as like terrace space, so it's not the same dimension all the way around, but
Okay.
we can find that out for you.
Okay, I think that would be good. The Flatiron might be a little challenging as a comp because it's so
Much
tall.
taller, right.
Yeah. And it's so tight in that part where you're not really seeing it from that great a distance, where Biltmore Village is a little more open and you're more likely to see. I think
You
the
can
point.
stand further back from it, yeah.
Yeah, I think the point of a stepped back upper story is not just your differentiation and reducing massing, but it's also to obscure from the pedestrian viewpoint that building contains more space than you would, initially think. And I am concerned that a 6-foot setback might not be sufficient to achieve that goal. Though I am immensely grateful for the work that has been done to drop the height of the entire complex and to perhaps be maybe a little more respectful to those second quarter of the 20th century commercial buildings that really define Kitchen Place on the other side of the street. Like others, I still struggle with the height, massing, form of Building 4. Though I think that the change, that new entrance building, eliminating the trellis concept is far more successful and compliant with the standards.
I'd like to commend you for an incredible amount of work in a short period of time. I think you did listen. It's nice to be heard. And I agree that I think building 1, 2, and 3 are really going in the right direction. Building 4, to me, I would love to see its lightness of being continue. You've got the glazing, open glazing in the ballroom to go along. I'm not quite sure how you could do that, but I went and walked around the site, and it's very open now, and when you imagine all of that there, it's going to substantially change the village. So I think if that building 4 can dance a little bit with its mass, I think that would be great.
I want to echo Commissioner Oliva's sentiments there. I wasn't here last month to see the fantastic developments that have happened in this proposal, so I regret that a lot. But I can't, the only thing that I can't get away from is the Building 4 feels very much like a bookend to Biltmore Village. It makes me feel like how Talbot's is kind of like that edge over here in those buildings. I would just hate to see that kind of massing right there where Biltmore Village, that's not the edge of Biltmore Village, it's all I can think of. So I'm excited to see what further developments can happen in terms of making it a little lighter there.
So it doesn't feel like an
Open it
edge.
up.
Yeah.
And a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like how you deal with that corner there somehow opening. Glass curtain walls. Great idea.
How very historic.
Thank you.
We had one of those buildings downtown, and they totally took it all off and put something else on it.
I want to jump in on the tree question. Because thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I actually had a third slide and I just was so ready to turn it over to you. I thought I'd bring up the trees. But to go back to what Christian was saying, Stephen Lee, the landscape architect, and I talked before the previous meeting about what's going on with the trees and the plan for trees in the book one of the guidelines. And I support, he asked me, would the commission want to see the streetscape along Kitchen Place, the street trees be removed, the existing sweet gum trees be removed and then planted with the tree species that's shown on the plan? And I said, I think the commission would support that, but also if you want to keep the trees, we're supportive of that as well. I think it will do a lot to kind of soften the streetscape there if they leave the trees, and then just replace them as needed over time versus just cutting them all down and planting more trees as part of this development. But again, I just wanted to make sure that didn't get missed, so that when he goes back to the team for the site plan finalization stuff, they can be clear on what they're showing on the plan.
Thank you.
Does anybody have a strong feeling one way or the other? I mean, you also, they could, they weren't proposing to remove them in the first place. It was just a question that we had, so you guys really can't technically say you have to replace all these trees. They're not proposing to do that. But they're obviously just wanting to know.
But with all that construction, are the trees even going to survive?
That was my worry.
Well, we have a tree protection plan, and we're fortunate in that the sidewalks are very deep because of that fanning out of the street. It's a generous, I mean, we've certainly worked with trees in much closer urban conditions than these, so I'm hopeful.
Okay.
Certainly, I'm of the mind, if the goal is to keep the trees and to do everything we possibly can to do that properly. Certainly, we're doing it with the Oriental spruce, and we've
Yeah.
already
Well, and that
commissioned
feels pretty
arborists to really
important.
study
Yeah.
the root
That feels
system.
pretty
So,
important.
and that's on the site. These are, within a 15-foot sidewalk and tree lawn. So I'm hopeful. And they have amazing scale. They're 60, 70 plus
No, I
feet
know, and
tall.
that's
So
usually been
to the
the
point of softening the streetscape as a designer, I think, I kind of believe in the trees, that, keep them in the game. And then certainly respecting that, the original plan calls for other trees. There may be a point decades from now that a tree replacement is warranted.
Right.
I think the existing trees will, when the building is finished, make it feel like it belongs there and established in a way that little tiny brand new trees are going to make it go, this is a really new, brand new, huge building. So I sort of like the idea that those trees stay there and this building sort of falls in behind it and, picks up where everything else left off. And
What is the age of the existing trees of the sweet gums?
I believe Mr.
knows?
Griffin can speak to that.
25.
I planted
You did?
I raised the money to plant them. And there was a sweet gum tree in front of our company back in 1975. There were sweet gum trees on that street. So whether or not Olmsted did it or who did it, they've been there for 50 years. They've established a historic precedent according to the Secretary of Interior guidelines.
And what would the caliper be of any new linden trees?
Skinny.
This would be
Skinny.
a site works question, but I can look at the plan that we had up just a moment ago.
I know that there's a minimum caliper
Yeah.
in our development ordinance, but I don't know, I think it's really small. It's like 2.75 5.
Yeah, little,
Yeah, little tiny trees, but I don't know if they say specify that on the.
Yeah, 2.5 to 3-inch caliper right there. Oh, that's a different one, too.
That's a plant.
3-inch caliper.
Mm-hmm. Little tiny.
You get up to the in nursery in Tennessee where Olmsted got them, and that business is still there, and yet they're still only 2 to 3 inches. And they look very young for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is like helpful to have conversation, but we can't really operate like that.
Right.
It's like, you have to reopen public comment.
Okay.
It's not on behalf of the applicant, sorry, not trying to be particular, but.
I agree with that. Okay.
I would be inclined to support retaining the existing trees because of the buffer and softening of the new building. Rather, while I respect the original Olmsted plan and, a desire to return to the original intent of that plan, I think that the practical benefit of retaining the sweet gums far outweighs the altruistic desire to return to Olmsted's plan with trees whose caliper has no impact on the visual qualities of the district.
Other comments, commissioners? Do you have questions? You need clarification from us on anything before you scurry back?
Yeah, I
you,
want
Ron.
to thank everyone for your thoughtful comments tonight and your patience as we work through this as a complicated project and your recognition of that and allowing us to be able to work on this incrementally with you. We know we have a lot of work to do. So I think, I've taken lots of notes and this will be certainly helpful. I think we're hearing that we're moving in the right direction with these notes. I guess any kind of consensus comment or resolution you may have may help us to say that
Seems like the
we've.
two biggest impact focus for you all is really studying Building 4. I think that's the place where we're all still a little bit apprehensive about. I think the setback question is real on Building 1 and Building 3. I think those are probably the two biggest moves to consider in terms of massing and scale. And then I think we can, I feel pretty good about us moving in a little bit more hardline direction on detailing and really proving that the scale and massing works when you get down to it and draw a wall section. So I think, that's sort of, anybody disagree with me?
No.
I think those are the two big things, is the setback, building setback, and the sort of Building 4.
Can I ask a devil's advocate question? Actually, I'm not sure you would probably put the loading dock in the parking garage entrance somewhere else if you could. But I, know that that's going to come up in the TRC process, and I just wondered, something to consider, obviously, because obviously if that is going to be a problem in the technical review, then where can that go and how much does that impact the proposed design today? Because I totally understand, like I was talking to Robert earlier today, saying I don't like to even drive down Boston Way because it's so tight. And obviously their parking deck entrance on the other side is going to be like right across, so it is going to be challenging, which I know you are well aware of. I just want, just consider that if, that does in fact change during the technical process, then, we'll have to come back here for design again. So I just.
Yeah.
We certainly will. We recognize that different boards have different responsibilities to review, and the TRC process will very much be a part of what we're doing. The thinking in the location of the vehicular in and out was to put it across from the garage entry on Boston Way that's, and you can see in the context photo that it's the one place in a four-sided site that's really hard to say there's any place. Certainly Hendersonville Road, because of the high volume of traffic, is very dangerous to enter and exit. And then certainly you can't do it on Kitchen Place, you can't do it on Angle Street. So it's one of those decisions you have to be as discreet as possible and make your move. And there's been consensus that Boston, to this point, Boston is the right place to do it, and it's across from the service entry of the adjacent building, which makes sense. There is a question of traffic flow, and we're working with folks in the village, the Merchants Association, certainly to learn about the day-to-day traffic patterns, what people really experience.
Both ways on that street.
Yes. And it is on-street park on both sides right now. And I know our engineering team is studying curb to curbs and, the existing historic curb to curb to maintain that. I think it's possible that in order to keep safe two-way movement, that adjacent to the new project, that parking would come off. That would allow that to work the way it probably needs to. But that's all going to be very much part of that process with the technical.
We all understand that it's the one street that feels most like a side street as much as any of these streets can. So it made sense from out of the gate when you put it there. But then I was like, how are they going to do this because of the two-way traffic mainly, and trying to get, as you pointed out, like the circulation pattern for passenger drop-off, et cetera. So I know you guys are working on all that. Just wanted to.
And certainly if changes come through that process, we will absolutely bring it back here so that gets integrated into the conversation about the architecture as well.
I'm wondering if like a 3D model that, it doesn't have to be pretty, but just something that shows like massing and height. You could see the step back, floors on some of these buildings, and also building number 4, see, the massing, and maybe in context. And again, it can just be, solids, something, just to throw that out there. Yeah.
Well, the next step for y'all would be to request a continuance, right? And when you have to.
Resubmit the deadline is next week?
Yeah.
No.
You tried that once and.
So I'll let you know.
I think out of a spirit of progress, but reality, I would request a continuance until not
August.
the next cycle, but the August
meeting.
meeting, if I may do that.
Yeah.
Just need a motion.
I'll motion to continue this to the August meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There we are.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Other business.
Yeah.
We don't have everybody.
Right?
Gavel any other business. Whack.
Okay. I have one thing before everybody goes.
Okay.
Hey, sorry, everyone. I am just going to say on behalf of the commission, we got you a gift, and sorry the box is kind of smushed because it came in the mail this way today, and I was going to take it home and wrap it for you so we could give it to you next week, but then I thought that it might be fun for you for your last gavel to have your very own.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I can't hardly stand it.
Made of rubber.
I'm obsessed with this. It does have my name on it.
Oh, wow. 2 years that you were chair, I
Yes.
think it would be weird if I put anyways, but you've been with us for 6 whole years.
I know, it's
so-
been
And you
6
and
years.
Emily Spring and
She likes it.
commitment, so.
It's beautiful.
Yay! You're welcome. I originally picked out this really cool gold one, but it was like $300.
You were good, but not that good,
Yeah.
right? Well, thanks.
Walk to your car, you'll be arrested
know.
for walking home with rubbish.
That's true, huh? Yeah, I do want a box. Yes. Well, we have no other business, right? Except we get together next week?
Yeah,
Party?
Tuesday at 4:30 at Pleasant Foundation.
Sounds good.
We have beautiful weather like today.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm coming.
Awesome. Excellent. I better make sure it's on my calendar.
That's a
All right.
perfect gift. I don't
Thanks,
think
everybody.
anybody's enjoyed that gavel as much as I
Yeah, it really is.
But we should really put like dates. We should get a bigger gavel and then start to put like the more the chair